I think in the interest of saving everyone's time, let's just get started. So for the record, my name is Julia Mejia, City Councilor at Large. I'm the chair of the Boston City Council's Committee on Government Accountability, Transparency, and Accessibility. I'm joined by my colleagues in the order of arrival, which I will state shortly. This public hearing is being recorded. It is being live streamed at boston.gov, city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity 8, RCN channel 82, Fios channel 964. We'll be taking public testimony at the end of this hearing. If you are interested in testifying, please email ccc.gata@boston.gov for the link. Today's hearing is on docket 0617, Order for a Hearing on Government Transparency, Accountability towards Service Provision Spending for English Language Learners. Later, we'll also be hearing docket 0724, Order for a Hearing on an Audit of Boston Public Schools Special Education Service and Return on Investments. Today, I am joined by my colleagues, obviously, Councilor at Large Julia Mejia, Councilor Coletta, President Flynn, Council President Flynn, Councilor at Large Murphy, Councilor Laura, Councilor Louis Jen, and we'll call out others as they arrive. The first portion of this hearing will be discussing docket 0617, followed by docket 0724. We'll begin with community advocates, panelists first, followed by public testimony, and then the administration panelist. As you start your testimony, please state your name, address, and affiliation. Today, we are joined by community activists, and the panelists include the following speakers on docket 0617. Suzanne Lee, BPS Immigration Community Leader. John Mudd, Suhey Scannell, Parent Advocate. Elsa Flores, Community Leader. Diana Santiago, with Mass Advocates for Children. And we'll begin with our first panel. We'll also be joined by the administration, and the administration panel will be Farah Assaji, who is the Deputy Chief Academic Officer and Interim Assistant Superintendent, Office of English Language Learners, Office of Multicultural and Multilingual Education, as well as Linda Chan, who is the Senior Deputy Superintendent of Academics, and David Bloom, who's the Chief Financial Officer. Okay, so let's begin. First, before we get started, wanted to, because of the time, I am going to not do opening comments. So if my colleagues can reserve that time to, during your questions, any opening comments, if you could use it then. También quiero dejarles saber que para la gente que necesita interpretación, yo voy a estar asistiendo en esa capacidad. So no se preocupen, que estoy aquí entre Kendra, entre Councilor Lara y yo. Las dos somos hispanas y podemos asistirle en esa manera. Vamos a comenzar ahora con nuestro hearing. Y I will just set the stage that this is really, it's in government accountability and transparency for a reason. We really want to be able to dig into when we think about the services that are supposed to be rendered to ELs, you know, we would love to hear a little bit more about kind of what are the roadblocks, right? We don't want this to be an adversarial hearing. We really want you all to recognize that we are partners. And we're bringing all the stakeholders to this conversation because that's the only way we're all going to be able to move forward if we do so in collaboration and in partnership with each other. So for the administration, you already been warned, no big PowerPoints, you know, so we really want to create a dialogue. So thank you for allowing us to lead with community first, because I hope that will help set the stage. So without further ado, in the interest of time, I am definitely going to be keeping time for our panelists. You each get 5 minutes. And we are going to start with Suzanne Lee. You now have the floor.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am glad to be here to see so many familiar faces, but also some new faces, and hope that I can share my story with you in the hope of moving our city and our schools forward for the children. So this topic is very personal to me. I've been a student and a teacher and a school principal. So my whole life is intertwined with the Boston Public School. And I'm happy to say that I am more hopeful today than I've been for a long time, because what I see is in place to allow us to move forward. But I'm also sad that in my 40 years since I was hired as a bilingual teacher in 1974, in a lot of ways, we are starting backwards. So I want to touch on those two things. When I say this is deeply personal with me, I'm going to share a quote with you. They won't always remember what you taught them, but they will never forget how you treated them. My first encounter with BPS when I was a student at 11 years old, I was told that I didn't know anything. So I was put back from the 6th grade to 4th grade. I remember that today. So for 3 years, I had no idea what went on in this classroom. Even though everybody was very kind to me, but I didn't learn any content. So as I became a teacher, I wanted to give back to make sure that children don't suffer the way that my generation did. So I was glad to be one of the first bilingual teachers to start the programming in Boston Public Schools in 1974, in the first year of busing. And then when question 2 came in, that we were told we no longer can use the native language and everything's going to be English only. I knew then that we are in an uphill fight. But since then, we were able to change the law to the Look Act, which means that we can now use the native language as part of the teaching tool that we should use for children who need it. But here we are since 2017. We have not moved that far from implementing any programming. But I am happy to say that because of the advocacy from the community and from some of us who work hard on this issue, both now we have the city government, like you all, as well as DESE, and the school department recognizing that native language access to that is the important tool to address the education of all of our immigrant children for those who need it. So right now, I see the whole budget. Money should not be the issue. It's what do we do with that money that really makes a difference. And having us see, and I know David Bloomer said they would tell you, okay, we're spending almost $20,000 per student, but do we have the result to show for it? It really shows we have not been using that money in the right way. So I'm hoping that now, moving forward, that we can delve deeper. It is not a question of having more money. For any students to have $20,000 is different than special needs or immigrant students who might need more. Not just a little bit more, it's how we use it. What we need, I think, is 2 things. One is that we need the right staffing in our school and really provide them the necessary tools through professional development. I don't mean just the teaching staff. I also mean principals, the front office, paras, lunch monitors. Anyone who works in our school needs to have that kind of training. They don't need to be all bilingual, but they need to know how to treat our children and have the sensibility of welcoming everyone. But in every school, we need to have people who speak the language. We might not be at the stage where we can have a classroom teacher in all the classroom that speak the language, but in every school, there needs to be somebody, depending on the percentage. And this is something that we demanded back in 1974, and we're still not there. And we have lost a whole generation of bilingual teachers that we almost have to start from scratch now to bring that back up. So people might not want to hear that. That's what I see that we need to work on. But we do have administration and school the leadership in the school, but not enough. We don't have enough bilingual leadership within the BPS central office, as well as in our school. So we need to sink a lot more money into professional development, how to get it up there. And so translation and interpretation is not the end all. That's a very basic baseline. And just we saw how difficult that is right now, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop there, but I am hopeful. It seems like everybody is saying the right thing at the moment. I have to see how we implement that budget.
That's right. Thank you for that, Suzanne. You know, having served on the ELL task force with you, I share the same sentiments. And I know, Farah, you have also been a long time working in this space, so I know that you hear it and feel it, and I'm sure that's why Suzanne is so encouraged by what's happening in the city right now. So looking forward to your testimony shortly. I'm going to move on to John, and I don't know if you heard the buzzer, but you literally have 5 minutes, and that's all you get. So make sure you bring it. And then the other piece is that I wanted to just note that someone from my team is communicating with those who need interpretation and translation simultaneously, so that each of your testimonies are being shared with those who are tuning in, because we're making do with what we have. So thank you to my team for helping us with that. Okay, so John.
Thanks, Madam Chair, Counselor. A long time. I'm a resident of Cambridge, but a long-time advocate, actually 30 years around the Boston Public Schools, so I've probably seen too much. I think, I'm a sobering kind of person, unfortunately. Let's be clear that BPS is failing to provide an opportunity to learn and achieve for EL students with disabilities since question 2 passed. That's too long, since question 2 was foisted on Boston by the state. You know the MCAS results, and I don't need to go through them, but it means that we have to recognize that over 90% of English learners and English learners with disabilities are not being prepared to meet required standards. As Suzanne talked eloquently, not only from personal experience, but experts say that building on a foundation of native language is the best way to learn academic content in English. The state legislature passed the Look Act, which gave us flexibility to go beyond question 2 in using native language, but BPS has not yet taken full advantage of this opportunity. Recently, BPS has taken a major step forward in approving a policy that says access to native language is the #1 priority for English learners. But people don't recognize that still 40% of English learners are in general education classes with ESL support. And even more seriously, from my perspective, over the past few years, we have seen a decline of 1,000 students placed in single language SEI classes where they could receive some significant support in native language. And in only 1/3 of those classes has there been a match between the language of the teacher and the language of the students. BPS needs to move faster to take advantage of the Look Act flexibility. The most recent plan from the OMME office says that the next 3 years will be spent in planning changes, and only in 4 years will new programs be implemented. From my perspective, we need to move faster. We need to stop dumping ELs into general education. We need to expand single language SEI classes and transitional bilingual education classes, as well as dual language. On the subcommittee that I work on has particular concerns with ELs, English learners with disabilities. There are 4,000 of them in Boston. This is 1/3 of all special education students, but they do not receive 1/3 of the attention and resources in meeting their unique joint needs to support learning English and the challenges of disability. BPS to date does not even have a draft overall plan for these students. We have been arguing there needs to be a separate plan, even though the Memorandum of Understanding with the state groups them under English learners, and a separate plan that includes the primary and joint responsibility of the Office of Special Education in the development and implementation of such a plan. The Council of Great City Schools just completed an audit. Its report agrees with us and calls for a separate joint Office of Special Education, Office of Multilingual Education plan for English learners with disabilities students that gives access to native language. We have not yet heard BPS's response to these recommendations and look forward to constructive work together so that we can finally bring the programs that these students need. On the budget, each school now receives an allocation for English learners, for students with disabilities, and the English learners with disabilities get a double allocation. In addition, there are $40 to $50 million of ESSER funds are allocated on the basis of these plus low-income students. Yet, to my knowledge, there is no budget guidance for the innovative use of these funds for English learners with disabilities, and no reporting system for evaluation and accountability for the results of the use of these funds. As the committee order states, what is the return on investment? We should ask BPS both to develop the guidance and to develop the accountability systems. Suzanne mentioned staff diversity and professional development. We still have not made much progress in staff diversity over the past decade. There are, I believe, about 11% Latino teachers in a system that is 43% Latino. That diversity has been focused on race. We should also include language diversity. What are the school profiles that show the gaps in language diversity and racial diversity? We need to see those. What are the targets for increasing the diversity of language? For English learners with disabilities, a couple of years ago, a staff person did a manual survey and found that there were 16 bilingual special education teachers in the 64 reporting schools, compared to 4,000 ELSWD students in the district as a whole. This needs a change. I would talk, and I'll stop, on the importance of keeping the achievement gap as a top priority for the system that has been lost in the shuffle, and for the implementation of the racial equity achievement gap tool that has not been fully implemented either in analyzing data or in projecting its impact on Blacks, Latinos, ELs, and students with disabilities. Thank you for letting me run over.
Yes.
Adam.
Well, you were the mastermind behind this hearing order, so I gave you a little bit of extra grace since you were the inspiration behind this gathering. So, John, don't you ever go over again, okay? No, I'm just checking. Thank you for that, John.
I don't promise.
I really do appreciate you bringing data and also really helping us start to think about how we're going to measure success. I think that's really key. So I'm going to go to our next panelist, Suhei, who's going to be doing it in Spanish, and Luz from my office will be translating. Because this is what it looks like, right? And I'm glad that this manifested the way that it did, because it really goes to show the importance of how much work we still need to do to help support our community. So, hey, tú tienes el piso, te toca a ti ahora. Tú tienes 5 minutos también, ¿oíste?
Oh, ok, gracias. Trataré de hacer todo más rápido.
And the way lo vamos a hacer, que tú vas a hablar por tú vas a decir para que Luz pueda traducir para ti, lo que vamos a hacer es que darle una pausa. Ella puede compartir lo que tú acabas de decir y después seguir con tu testimonio, ¿ok?
Yo le envié parte de lo que iba a decir para que ella lo fuera mirando. Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Un placer verlos a todos, caras muy familiares, gracias. Me voy a presentar, voy a hacer en inglés, si quieren me voy a presentar en inglés para que ya no tengan que traducirlo. My name is Suheyes Canel and I'm an immigrant. I'm from the Dominican Republic and I have 3 kids and 2 of them are students of BPS. I live in Rosendale and I work for like a family organizing for San Steven. Ahora voy a decir mi parte en español. Ya practiqué un poco, gracias. Muchas gracias por la invitación a este prestigioso panel y con este tema tan importante sobre aprendices del idioma inglés.
Thank you for inviting me to to be a panelist on this really important topic about language learners.
Los aprendices del idioma inglés representamos el 30% del total de la matriculación de BPS, que son 46.525 estudiantes. Además, que el 69% de estos estudiantes son low income.
Dijo que 30% de los estudiantes representan...
No, el 30% de los estudiantes son aprendices del idioma inglés y el 69%
30% of students are language learners. ¿Qué más?
Perdón, pensé que era...
Perdón.
No, está bien. Y el 60% de estos estudiantes son estudiantes de familias de bajo ingreso.
And 75% of BPS students are students with low income means.
Es importante saber que el 21% recibe educación especial.
It's important to know that 21% of them receive special education.
Cerca del 24% de los ya identificados son aprendices del idioma inglés.
25% of them son aprendices del idioma inglés. Are also learning English.
De todos los estudiantes con IP, el 83% son de familias bajo ingresos.
From all of the students with an IEP, 83% of them are families that are low income.
Observando las estadísticas y los números, nos damos cuenta que los estudiantes de aprendices del idioma inglés necesitan más apoyo y más recursos y más atención.
Seeing these numbers, it is important to recognize that these students that are also learning English, they need even more attention and assistance to be able to perform effectively and efficiently in their academic school.
Okay. Entonces debemos detenernos a pensar que muchas de esas familias son analfabetas en su propio idioma, no saben ni leer ni escribir.
It is important to understand that a lot of these families, they actually don't know how to read or write in their own language.
Como madre organizadora de familias y persona de comunidad que soy, que además quiero lo mejor para mis hijos.
I am a mother, an organizer of families, and a person who is involved in the community. I also want I want the best for my children.
Por eso eso me trajo a este país, la educación de mis hijos. Y en este año decidí poner mis hijos en un programa de BPS que se llama MEDCO.
That's the reason why I came to this country, so I can give my children a good opportunity. And this year, I enrolled my children in a BPS MEDCO program.
A pesar de haberlos mudado de distrito, creo mucho y abogo por muchas familias, ya que soy madre organizadora, escucho sus historias y veo lo que está pasando en nuestras escuelas. Y como están en método, puedo tener la vara de medir.
It was hard for her because having to move her children to a different school system, but she recognizes how important it is for her children to receive a good education.
Entonces, sí, el Distrito Escolar de Boston tiene los recursos, tiene las personas, tiene las intenciones de tener una buena educación. Ya es tiempo de que se pueda poner un plan bueno en marcha para específicamente los estudiantes aprendices del idioma inglés que representan ese 30% de los estudiantes.
If VPS is serious about the schools, the children, the people, it's important for them to start making change, to start working on this now, for children, especially for second language learners, so they can do well, perform well in schools.
Algunas de las recomendaciones que podemos tener es que se creen programas sostenibles en tiempo y espacio para que nuestros estudiantes no solamente se hagan los programas, sino que se les dé seguimiento, que se puedan materializar.
She's saying that it's not just important to create these programs, but to make sure that they're being maintained and that they are being observed to make sure that they are continuing to work.
Y saber si está funcionando para el estudiante, si ellos lo están aprovechando.
And make sure, and to make sure that it's actually working for the students, so that way that they're being able to utilize the program correctly.
También que se pueda implementar la ley LUT que fue creada en el 2017 y para que los estudiantes puedan recibir educación, alfabetización en su propio idioma nativo.
And so she also thinks it's important for us to take advantage of the 2017 Look Act, so that way students can take advantage of it.
Más maestros multilingües y bilingües que puedan ayudar con más acceso al idioma.
We need more students, more access for bilingual students, so they can learn the language.
Especialmente los estudiantes que abogar más por los estudiantes multilingües con deshabilidades.
Especially students that are bilingual that are also special needs.
Muchas gracias, y en realidad quiero decirle que creo en el sistema, creo en lo que todos están aquí estamos haciendo. Veo como madre, me doy cuenta de que un sacrificio de llevar mis hijos en la madrugada para un bus, me gustaría que recibieran ese servicio dentro de mi comunidad, con todo lo que ellos están recibiendo allá, recibirlo en su propio recinto. A pesar de ser un programa de BPS, no está dentro de mi comunidad. Muchas gracias.
She said thank you. She does have a lot of hope that that BPS will do the right thing and continue and help make the changes that the students need. And she's just thankful for being here.
Yeah. And one thing that she also mentioned that I wanted to uplift, which I think is really interesting and for us to all really ponder on, is that it's unfortunate that she has to send her children to Meco. She would rather have them be educated here in her community, in her neighborhood, but she has to find elsewhere to go to ensure that they get proper education, which is one of the reasons why this particular hearing is so important, because we are losing families, and we need to really think about what we're going to do differently to change how we do business to keep our kids here. So gracias. Okay. Okay. So the next person who we have slated for a panelist is my dear friend and someone who I've been working in the education space with for many, many years. It's quite interesting because Elsa does speak English, but she really wants to do her testimony in Spanish. Given the work that we're all trying to do here, she felt it was important for us to understand the importance of being multilingual and creating space for native speakers to be fully expressed. So with that, Elsa, la jefa Flores, tiene el piso. Te voy a dar 5 minutos, ¿ok, jefita?
Voy a ser breve, ¿ok? Hola, mi nombre es Elsa Flores. Vivo en East Boston por casi 20 años.
Hi, my name is Elsa Flores. I have lived in East Boston for almost 20 years.
Gracias, concejal Mejía y todo el equipo de trabajo, todas las personas por la oportunidad de esta tarde.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia, and everybody for giving me the opportunity to be here and speak to you today.
Tengo 3 hijos. Mis 3 hijos han estudiado en las escuelas públicas de Boston. Estoy dentro del sistema escolar de Boston como madre por 16 años.
I have 3 children. They're all BPS students. I have been in the BPS. My students have been involved with the BPS system for the past 16 years.
2 de mis hijos ya terminaron su high school y todavía me queda uno estudiando su high school.
I had 2 of my children finish high school, and one of them is now currently in high school.
16 años en este sistema con experiencias no muy agradables porque no he visto cambios desde este tiempo que he estado involucrada como líder, como activista y como madre.
I have 16 years that I have been involved, and I have been disappointed that it has been not very helpful, not very good. No me acuerdo qué más dijo. Perdón.
Que no he visto ningún cambio hasta este momento.
I haven't seen any changes until now. I haven't seen any changes in the 16 years that she's been here.
Tenemos una población estudiantil de latinos que es muy alta.
We have a very high percentage of Latino students.
Mis 3 hijos han sido categorizados dentro de los aprendices del idioma inglés y educación especial.
All 3 of my students have been categorized as English learners and students with special needs.
Amo el sistema escolar de Boston porque mis 3 hijos han estado ahí y he tenido experiencias de otras familias también, pero necesitamos cambios con urgencia.
I love the BPS schools because they have been there, and a lot of the parents also, but we need immediate changes.
Necesitamos una reforma educativa con urgencia que incluya diversidad de maestros, recursos, dinero para apoyar los aprendices del idioma inglés y los de educación especial.
We desperately and immediately need changes such as diversity in the teacher population, resources de recursos de qué más, perdón.
Recursos, dinero y servicios que los estudiantes necesitan estar recibiendo.
Money and assistance that the student needs for English language learners and for special education children.
Ya es tiempo que el sistema escolar de Boston deje de documentar cualquier reunión, cualquier situación de cambio que no se ve reflejado en la realidad.
So it's time for BPS to stop documenting things that don't actually reflect the reality.
Necesitamos esa reforma que muestre apoyo en el proceso de transición para los estudiantes y familias aprendices del idioma inglés, proceso de transición de los programas ILL hacia la educación general.
Creo que me va a tener que decir en parte.
I can help with this.
I can say in English.
Yeah, we could say this because this has been something that Elsa has been advocating for with an organization that I founded around the transition for ELs when they go into general education. There's a gap there in terms of the type. Háblalo un poquito, que tú eres una experta en eso.
El proceso de transición de la categoría aprendices del idioma inglés a educación general significa como familias recibir el apoyo necesario para poder reflejar el progreso de nuestros hijos dentro de la educación.
Okay.
So she's talking about having a transition, like we need a good transition program where students are able to transition from these programs English language learners and going into regular classes. And so there needs to be more support into that transition rather than just immediately just bringing them one and taking them to the other space.
Es lo mismo para nuestros estudiantes y familias en educación especial, en los programas de educación especial, que estén recibiendo los servicios apropiados que por ley y por derecho nos corresponden a las familias.
It is important, it is the same services that other students are getting. By law, these are a lot of the same resources and assistance that our children are entitled to.
Un ejemplo sencillo que por experiencia lo he vivido y muchas familias también.
An example that I have lived and other families have also lived.
Recibir toda documentación en nuestro propio idioma.
Receive documentation in our own language.
Y no en inglés, presionados para firmarlo pronto para que nuestros hijos reciban los servicios.
And not in English to make us and enforcing us, pressuring us to sign it quickly.
Para que nuestros hijos reciban los servicios.
To make sure that our children are receiving the information, the resources that they need.
Cuando hablamos de aprendices del idioma inglés y estudiantes de educación especial,
when we talk about children or students that are English language learners and our special education students,
es un asunto muy importante y con urgencia de tener mejoras en el sistema escolar de Boston.
It is a very important issue, and it's something that needs to be done to fix, or that needs to be improved for our students.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.
Gracias. Gracias por la oportunidad. Te lo dije en español, ¿ok? Gracias, Elsa. De verdad te agradezco siempre tu voz en este espacio. Eres una madre tremenda y una activista que sin ti no creo que nosotros hemos podido hacer la mayoría de las cosas que hemos hecho para la escuela. Gracias por tu tiempo aquí con nosotros. También estoy bien agradecida que St. Stephen's también siempre están batallando para nuestra gente. Just quickly, for those who want to know, I was just thanking both of the parents for bringing their voice into this space, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it is them who we work for. And the best way for us to learn is taking our direction from those who are living the realities and doing the work. And the four panelists that have just spoken are just that, right? They are in the front lines, living these realities and or doing the work in this space. So I want to thank our four panelists for being here. So ahora I'm going to go to Diana Santiago, who I met at a DESI, I believe, workshop. We were looking at professional interpretation and translation back in the day. So happy to see you again and happy to have you here. You are listed here, and I believe you're with Mass Advocates for Children, correct still? Yes, awesome. So you now have the floor.
Thank you so much. So good afternoon. And yes, thank you, Councilor Mejia and committee members for the opportunity to give testimony today. I am Diana Santiago, an education attorney and director of Adelante, advancing the education rights of immigrant and multilingual children at Mass Advocates for Children, or MAC. And just briefly before I'm using some of my precious time here just to express a little bit of my disappointment. I have to say something that I truly appreciate your stepping up, Councilor Mejia and Luz, so that we can hear Suhey and Elsa's important testimony. But by not having a trained interpreter set up for this meeting, it has prevented them also from being able to listen to all of us on the important issues that are being raised. Their voices are so important. They're informed voices, and I think that I'd urge you, you brought so much positive change, Councillor Mejia, to the City Council. And if this can be a change that you make for City Council hearings to ensure that there are trained interpreters, I think that would go a long way, for all of the City of Boston's residents. So thank you. So multilingual English learners really bring brilliance and diversity to Boston Public Schools in immeasurable ways. So coming from over 130 countries and speaking 85 languages, this growing population of students carry the potential to be our next generation of leaders, multilingual leaders across all sectors, educators, medical providers, community and business leaders, policymakers, really limitless potential. Tragically, however, BPS and other school districts are failing these students. Nearly half of BPS multilingual English learners, 47%, were chronically absent last school year. Just 6% met or exceeded expectations on the 10th grade English Language Arts MCAS. A year ago this month, the Boston Globe reported that nearly 60% of BPS multilingual learners were not getting enough specialized instruction to which they were entitled. BPS has a legal obligation to ensure that no student is denied equal educational opportunity due to their status as an English learner, regardless of leadership turnover, COVID, or staffing shortages. Not surprisingly, bilingual English learners with disabilities face even more daunting barriers to equal educational opportunities. Too many multilingual English learners in substantially separate special education placements fail to receive support from an ESL licensed educator and do not receive instruction in their native language required to access grade level content. Students with disabilities who are English learners need coordinated, integrated services and supports to succeed. But lack of coordination across the offices of multilingual and multicultural education and the Office of Special Education often means that supports are disconnected and ineffective for many students. I thought it might be helpful to provide an example. Mac represented a family of an elementary age student with a disability whose home language is Spanish. We got involved with the family when they were hitting a wall seeking supports for their son to remain in a full inclusion setting. It was clear from the outset that language barriers had impacted the family's ability to understand and navigate the special education process. Just as importantly, these language barriers often prevented the team from hearing the parents' perspective and crucial information they had to share about their son. BPS contracted to provide professional interpreters at team meetings, but these interpreters were untrained in interpretation in the challenging context of team meetings, and oftentimes were ineffective. It took a new school, but the family was finally successful in getting BPS to agree to full inclusion with the support their son needed. Then the pandemic happened. Despite the student's mother dedicating herself, and I mean really dedicating herself to supporting her son's remote learning for over a year, like many students, he fell behind in his English language development and in other areas. Contributing to his loss of skills, BPS didn't provide the direct ESL instruction for over a year. After months of delays and the threat of legal action, BPS finally did provide services from an educator assigned, but this teacher didn't speak Spanish or make use of an interpreter to communicate with his family to better understand his needs. Between his lost English language skills and time out of a real classroom, and his parents having lost confidence that BPS was capable of coordinating his required supports and services. Ultimately, they took a leap, aware of the risks, and enrolled him in a non-BPS charter school. Boston's multilingual English learner students deserve and are entitled to more. The City of Boston also deserves the many contributions that these students will make when given the opportunity to learn to their potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Really do appreciate it. And just want you to know, Diana, that we have someone from our office translating to everyone's testimonies here. So what we do is we make do with whatever we have. So what people are sharing here is also being relayed to the two parents that are here. We're making do with what we have, and really do appreciate that feedback. As the one who passed the language access ordinance here in the office, I've been a big champion of language and information justice, but due to the capabilities of being able to do things on the fly, we missed the mark there. So thank you for that. I believe we have one person for public testimony. Danielle? If someone from central staff can upgrade her to panelist. That's who's listed on my document. So if Danielle is not here, we can move on to the administration panel. So we're gonna start off with my good friend and super duper all things producer here, Farah. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I'm actually going to turn it over to Dr. Linda Chen. She's going to open us up for this session, and then I'll join her on the English language side.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Councilor Mejia, for providing the opportunity to have a discussion about our work for our students with disabilities and our multilingual learners. We know we have a significant amount of work in front of us in order for all of our students to flourish in ways that we know they can and deserve. While we have made progress, it is clear that we need to do better collectively, especially in our partnerships with families. However, we do know we have strong leadership in City Hall and at BPS. Superintendent Skipper and I are looking forward to continuing to partner with the mayor and the city council as we work together to improve academic and social outcomes for students. The intersectionality of multilingual learners and students with disabilities is critical for our work at the BPS. When we can provide excellent educational experiences for our most marginalized students, we know we can offer it all to all students. BPS is committed to ensuring that all students receive the services they require to succeed. All students should have full access to these services, and it is the responsibility of the district and the schools to engage parents as partners in their child's learning. While our current educational context was established over many decades, and we understand that change will take time, but at the same time, our students can't wait and there must be urgency to this work. We know some of the things we need to do now. We need to provide grade level instruction to all students. We have a linguistically diverse Boston community, and it's time to create more opportunities for students to become proficient in 2 or more languages to thrive and compete globally. This begins with expanding bilingual programs in the students' home languages. We need to consistently and regularly use data to monitor outcomes and intervene when we're not seeing the results we expect, and to prevent our over-identification of Black, Brown, and multilingual learners. We must have an unwavering commitment to ensure the least restrictive environment for our students. We need to strengthen our partnerships with families to make all of these things happen. And we also need to ensure there are clear performance indicators to demonstrate our progress, particularly with the use of resources. I will now turn it over to Farah Ashraj, our Deputy CAO leading the Office of Multilingual and Multicultural Education, and look forward to Lauren Viviani, our Interim Assistant Superintendent of Special Education, to respond in the second half of our time together. Again, thank you for this opportunity to have this conversation on this critical work, and we look forward to working together on the challenges that we discussed today. Farah.
Wait, before we go over to Farah, sorry, I'm going to Danielle. Tierney has joined us, so I did promise to do public testimony. That just gives you a little bit more time, Farah, to get your mind right. Okay, Danielle, you're being upgraded, and you declined. Okay, well, you might have to lower your hand. I thought you were ready. I'm gonna give you one more chance, Danielle. Okay. All right, Danielle. 3, 2, 1. All right, Farah, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. And thank you to all of the counselors for this opportunity to discuss an important group of students. Many of us care deeply about our multilingual learners based on our own individual experiences, our advocacy work, as well as our, the heart of the teaching, being an educator, is to ensure the success of our students. And so we have prepared some very short slides. I've known Counselor Mejia for many decades now, and I know that this is really intended to be a discussion, but I think we wanted to make sure that we also just represented some visual information to kind of, at least for the public, to be able to support in this discussion. So we will certainly keep it brief. And this is a little bit of a snapshot to who our students are. We're very proud of our brilliant multilingual learners, and we have changed the language from English learners to multilingual learners because we know that many of our students have 2, 3, 4, and or more languages. And so it is an asset-based term. Majority of our students are Spanish speaking. We have over 80% of students who are Spanish speaking. We also have a variety of English language development levels of students across ELD 1 to 5, lower on the upper ELD level 5, but students arrive with a variety of needs and are placed in different programs. There are programs that support with native language. Those are SCI language specific programs if the teacher has that language as well. And that's an issue that we have some work to do because it is not a requirement in order to have the teacher also speak the language of the students. Additionally, we're no longer placing students in general ed as the state requirements for SCI programs are consistent. And so every classroom means that that teacher also has the SCI endorsement and qualification to serve and support those students. Additionally, those students are provided English as a second language services, and that really is based on the English language development level, and those teachers have to be licensed in ESL. So that's just a quick snapshot of our students, the languages, and we're very proud of the many other languages that are not represented here in the snapshot. We've done a lot of work. It has been a collaborative process. I'm also a former English Learner Task Force member, along with my colleagues here. And for many years, we have been advocating for this push towards bilingual education. And as my friend Suzanne Lee mentioned, the harm that question 2 has caused, especially with educators who may also speak that language and to also feel that you may not be able to use that language in supporting students. We have to transition the belief system of our educators, including principals, leaders, and the district. So I've been working very closely with my partners from the English Learner Task Force as well as other community groups. And this is really part of our systemic improvement plan. So our strategic plan is a part of the DESE systemic improvement plan work. And we have been able to present this and work in collaboration with many stakeholders, has been approved by the school committee as of October and endorsed by the English Learner Task Force. We also know that in the area 2, for example, in our priority 2, in the area of working with multilingual learners with disabilities, myself and my partner here, Lauren Viviani, worked together for many months on this area, and it is a joint effort. And so each of these areas, so expanding bilingual education and World Heritage Language programs is our #1 priority and focus for the plan, as well as ensuring that multilingual learners with disabilities receive appropriate services, in addition to improving instruction and outcomes for all multilingual learners across programs, and developing student-centered systems with an equity lens. And this is where the ELE services really fall into. And lastly, partnering with youth, families, communities, community-based organizations, education partners, and to really ensure that we're increasing opportunities for program options towards college and career readiness. So our strategic plan is on a timeline, and this is the time in which we are developing a project plan for each of those areas. So similar to what John Mudd stated, that area under priority 2 for multilingual learners with disabilities is going to have its own project plan similar to each of these priorities. And we really see this as leading towards an impact. There are many areas of program implementation that are regulated by DESE and by the U.S. Department of Justice. So this is the most aggressive and expeditious way in which we can move forward is in a systemic approach in terms of shifting towards transitional bilingual education in the form of dual language education programs. So our intent is to ensure that we're moving towards impact and outcomes. So our strategic plan for the areas that we've outlined is intended to increase student and family offerings for both bilingual and heritage programs, to provide native language support, especially for multilingual learners with disabilities, regardless of what program or seat in school that they are placed in, and to ensure that we're meeting the legal services and monitoring by both departments. We have been meeting jointly for many months, actually, since I probably have been in this interim role prior to Lauren's role. In the previous leadership at OSC, we do meet weekly, we have joint positions, and we do have a collaborative approach to this work. And I will say that it is getting stronger, and Dr. Linda Chen also joins us weekly for those meetings, and we have been aligning our work to ensure that the services are also being monitored and reported on from both departments. And that is a new effort that is also outlined in the strategic plan. Additionally, we need to align our materials and services to the core to ensure that we have the rigor and the quality that is needed in the core to ensure that the outcomes of those students and the services and supports match their needs. And that the bilingual materials are provided, especially in low incidence languages or languages that are spoken, which we may not have as much access to materials in those languages. Again, ensuring equity and access for all programs, courses, AP courses, services, other offerings, and to ensure that we're developing a coherent and cross-departmental support for students and engaging them and their families with native language support. My time is running up, but I want to make sure that we get to the ELE services in which we've made the most gains in the years of history that we've been reporting to the U.S. Department of Justice. As you mentioned, in previous year, we did not meet the standard. This is a metric in our strategic plan and strategic priority 4, where the threshold for this metric is 90% or above for ELE services. And I'm really excited to report that we have met that benchmark in our October reporting, and we will continue in reporting for December and March to report out to our public and EL task force on our compliance and ELE services for our students. And the investments here that I won't spend time, since my time is up, going through is outlined. And we want to thank the City Council body for approving the budget that has really been able to boost our efforts towards building the infrastructure for bilingual education. And we look forward to the next fiscal year and outlining those investments. I will turn it back to you, Councilwoman Chair.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. I really do appreciate the briefer PowerPoint presentation. We still need to work on less slides. I said 5, and I think you split them like there was more than 5.
Last one, Councilor. The rest are appendix.
Yeah, okay. But we're getting there, and everybody already knows you're coming to a hearing that is chaired by this person here. We're not doing data point slides. We want to focus our time and energy on real life examples and things that we can actually, that are tangible for us, right? Like for people who are listening that can understand this turns into this, right? Like I just think that numbers and data really sometimes just gets lost. And so really encouraging us to, as we continue to move forward, to bring more of real life examples into this space so that we can really see the return on investment, which I'm glad everyone's using that language because David Bloom, you know, I'm always asking, show me where the money is and how that money is making that impact. So I'm going to, I don't believe we tried to get Danielle. I don't know if you can hear us, Danielle. I've invited you a number of times to get upgraded to a panelist, but I don't know if you are able to do that. I see that we still have David Bloom to testify, and it is now almost 4 o'clock. So, David, I'm just curious, as your colleagues have already, you know, do you have any?
I'm only here to answer questions for you.
Okay,
but right. I do see Danielle maybe on the panel now.
Oh, Danielle, you made it. Danielle. Danielle, you now have 2 minutes. You have the floor. You have to go off mute.
Oh, and she's gone.
Okay. All right, she's playing peekaboo. Danielle, hopefully you'll come back and we'll get you in, okay? But in the interest of really making sure that my colleagues have time to ask questions, I know we had several of our panelists who couldn't stay longer, but we do have a critical mass here, folks. So I am going to just open it up for questions. And we're going to do this in starting off with the lead, one of my co-lead sponsors, which is Counselor Lara. You now have the floor and 5 minutes. Counselor Lara, are you still with us? Okay. All right. I am going to move, even though I'm one of the lead sponsors, I'm going to wait for my turn just in the interest of honoring my colleagues who have been here. I'm going to move on to the next person on my list who has been patiently waiting. And I'm not sure, Cora, it might be helpful for me to know who's still here. Counselor Coletta, I don't think is here anymore. I know Counselor.
No.
Nope, okay. So let me just delete this.
Counselor Braden is still here.
Okay, so Counselor, but in order of arrival.
Actually, I'm sorry. Actually, Counselor Lara is here, but she's muted, so I'm not sure. I see her name up, but I don't. Maybe she stepped away or something. I'm not sure.
So I'm going to go to Counselor Coletta. Is not here, so I'm going to go next to Counselor Breeden. I see that Counselor Coletta is back, so whoever shows first, that's the person who's going to go. Everybody. Okay, Counselor Coletta, you now have the floor.
I'm so sorry. I had to jump off for a 3 o'clock, but I'm back on. But I've had my chief of staff, Ellie Sanchez, who has a background in education issues, listening in and providing notes. But because we weren't able to provide opening statements, I just want to table set a little bit for me and my district. Well, first, let me just say thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you to the advocates. I see some neighbors of mine, Elsa Flores and Jakira Rogers, and obviously everybody else, the Suzanne Lee, thank you so much for your perspective. It's disheartening to hear that since 1973, nothing has changed and it's actually gotten worse. That was very sobering for me as a BPS kid. And to hear that we're so desperately failing these kids is just incredible. So thank you so much to the chairs and the chair and the sponsors for pushing this forward. But in East Boston, we have a lot of folks who have to choose between their language needs and their disability. And from what I've heard from parents, it's just the need for consistency and reliability in the quality of instruction and transportation. Jakira and I talked about this just last week. And just having healthy, wonderful environments for our students to reach their fullest potential. And it's been said before, but the disruptions due to COVID-19, we're seeing widening achievement gaps. And so we have to be intentional about where we're allocating the resources, especially for ELL students and those with special needs, but especially our ELL and special needs students. So for this conversation, I hope from BPS, we're going to be getting into the details of how BPS is utilizing their ESSER funds. I think there was $5 million for ESL, $7 million for special education, how these funds are interacting with one another to create meaningful programming and providing the support systems that students deserve. I do want to ask specific questions for my district, and it's okay if we have to follow up with this, but how many inclusion programs are provided in East Boston? How many seats are available? And the support systems that Spanish students are actually getting, our Spanish-speaking students are getting. I would love to talk about the staffing shortage and what we're doing to fill some of these vacancies. How much are we paying people? How do we determine their salaries? We need to retain and attract talent. And so the fact that we're not speaks to the fact that I don't think that we're keeping up with the cost of living here. Folks are not coming here to work. So I would love to get into that. And I do want an update on the two full-time positions to support English language learners with disabilities. I think that folks were still talking about filling them, and so I'd love an update on that. But I'm gonna stop there with my comments. Thank you, Chair, and thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you, Councilor Coletta. So not sure who from the administration wants to dive in first. Should I call people out? Because I'm good at that. Farah?
Counselor, I can start because I think there's some questions that overlap both English learners with disabilities as well as just English language learners. I think I'm going to start with the last point the counselor made around staffing, and then I'll cede the floor to my colleagues. But I think the point that you raised around salaries and staffing and recruitment and retention issues are real that we're grappling with. And in the two positions for English language learners with disabilities, we have been recruiting. They've been vacant for some time, and now we're thinking about how to, with our superintendent's support, how do we make that role in a way that we can right size it salary wise to get the kind of expertise that we need. So in all transparency, that's part of what we're going through right now because those positions that you're referring to have been vacant for so long. But
How long have they been vacant, Linda?
I need to make sure we get you the correct information so we can get you that information, but they've been vacant since I've been here. So for sure before August. Okay. And we can get that information back to you. And I think we'll also need to get more specific information back to you around the East Boston inclusion programs for sure. And if we can get folks, the staff, to get that information, we'll definitely do so during the hearing.
I was going to add, I will look up for you the information on seat capacity for inclusion programs in East Boston. Don't have it at the tip of my fingertips. I'll try and get it before the end of the hearing.
I just wanted to add for Councilwoman Coletta that we actually have some amazing work that's being done in East Boston in some of our schools. UMANA actually has a dual language and life program, both in Spanish. There are East Boston High School, for example, was recently highlighted for their increase in outcomes and achievement for multilingual learners, particularly in East Boston. Dr. Tommy Welsh, who's the superintendent of schools for that region, has been doing some tremendous work and really looking, analyzing data as well as programs, but with a real focus on academic outcomes for multilingual learners and those with disabilities. We'd be happy to get you some of those bright spots in schools so that you can also see the successes, right? Because I think we also have to frame the narrative of what our students are capable of doing and who they are and tell the full story. And MCAS, unfortunately, is not always the best predictor of outcomes and or achievement for multilingual learners. If you have students who arrive as SLIFE or ELD 1 and 2, for years, the way in which we've analyzed that data is that it correlates to their ELD levels and their English language development. So we really focus on the ELD levels 3, 4, and 5 and looking at growth, so individual growth of students. So we'd be happy again to share that data with you because it is misleading in some ways. And we want to make sure that while we have much work to do, and certainly an increase in bilingual education programming, that we are also uplifting the work that our students are doing and our educators in schools where we see the successes so we can also replicate them.
Thank you, Farah. And as a just really quick comment, Chair, just as a former UMANA student, I know how incredible that school is. I would love to, putting this on the record, I would love to just visit the UMANA and, like you said, highlight the successes. And if we can replicate what's going well there across the city of Boston, I encourage that. So thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Coletta. And for the record, I dropped out of the UMANA, but I also have a very deep love to also be invited back. So I will tag along with you, Councilor Coletta, on that. So I'm going to go to Councilor Lara, my co-sponsor.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia, and I'm sorry that I missed you. I was telling the councilor that someone walked in and I had the sound on mute, and so I missed her calling on me earlier. thank you all for all of your hard work and for being here and for your presentation. I know that what I often get and what I hear from people is that you wouldn't tell by my accent, but English is not my first language. I came to BPS as an English language learner and was in a bilingual education classroom until I was in the 7th grade. When it was decided that I knew enough English now to move to a full English classroom, which, I'm not sure was the best choice at the moment, but surely I made it out. And so this issue is incredibly important to me, not only because I am a former ELL student, but because I'm also a BPS parent now of a non-speaking first grader who is autistic. And so the intersection of ELL learning and the services that we're providing for our students with disabilities are things that are very near and dear to my heart because they touch my home and have an impact on my home and the life of my own life and the life of my child. So, we're having this conversation, and we're having this conversation specifically around, it's in the Committee for Government Accountability for a reason, because we want to have a conversation about what our return on investments are. And so my questions are specifically around what are the investments that we've made, right? We're moving into budget season again, but in last year's budget, there were investments that we were making into ELL language expansion and special education. And so I would like to hear, and you might not have the exact numbers available to you now, but what did those investments look like? I know that we grew the amount that we were spending per student. And so what was that amount? How were those resources spent in this past year? And specifically, did we meet the goals that we set, right? If we are making a greater financial investment in English language learners and our students with disabilities, then that investment is in alignment with the goals that we have for those specific students. And so I would like to hear any information that you currently have, but also want to make a proper request through the chair for BPS to really let us know how those investments were supportive in increasing the services, but also not just increasing the services, but also looking at how BPS did in terms of the quality of services for our students. So I'll stop there because I could talk for an hour, particularly about this issue, but that is my question. My question in terms of accountability is, we made a lot of investments in these students. What did those investments go towards? Did we spend it down? And how did those investments impact our performance in terms of how well we are serving these students?
So happy to jump in to start with the general fund investment, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues to talk a little bit more about the content and how that's actually playing out for students. In terms of our general fund budget, we did adopt a budget that reflected an approximately 3% increase, about $3.5 million more in spending on English learners through our general fund. Those funds primarily went to programs or two sort of types of services. One was the continued expansion of dual language programs. So an investment in the sort of finalization of the expansion of dual language at the UMANA, because that was rolling up through K-8, so getting that up all the way to 8th grade. And then a significant expansion in our work on translations and providing expanded translation services. In addition, we had support, as you mentioned, and as my colleague Farah Asaraj mentioned earlier, through ESSER and some additional work around content, and I'll let her speak to that.
Absolutely, I'm happy to add that for the ESSER investments that passed in the spring that we are still in the process of spending. One of the key strategies is on developing in the infrastructure for multilingual learners, especially with bilingual education. So I'm happy that we've been able to hire and restructure actually the Office of English Learners to the Office of Multilingual and Multicultural Education. And one of the strategies is to hire bilingual coaches. So we now have 8 coaches, most of whom are bilingual, actually 7 out of 8, but half of those coaches serve in bilingual roles and they support in the languages of those students across the BPS. That is one key investment. Additionally, one in which we are working with the MABE, which is the Multi-State Association for Bilingual Education, and they are going to be leading our effort for bilingual education. So we've contracted services with them to lead the district effort towards our transition bilingual education dual language program expansion this year. Some of the other spending has to do with bilingual education pathways and programs. So educators, in order to teach in a bilingual setting, have to have their qualifications by the state through the state licensure, which is a bilingual ed endorsement. So we do have a partnership with Boston College. We've increased seat capacity. And so the work that we're doing to also ensure that we're providing educator support in pathways is really essential to bilingual education in our work ahead, as we want to make sure that it's not just about creation of programs, that we have enough staffing. So that is another key strategy in which close to $1 million is going to be utilized. So we are still in the works to be able to expand the preparation programs, and partnerships for bilingual education pathways. I have some others that are listed on there, but if you have any specific questions around any of those from the appendix, I'm happy to also answer those or go through those in detail, Councilwoman Lara.
Farah, I'm sorry, because we're running out of time. You may not be able to go into that much detail, but I wanted to just give Councilor Lara an opportunity to ask any more follow-up questions before her time is up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. I'm like, what is going on here?
You're not on mute anymore.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for that. I'm trying to pull up and see just to make sure that I have my other questions. Everybody has had this conversation and has asked this question about attrition rates and staffing. And so can you talk a little bit about what are some of the issues for keeping teachers, or one of the main factors around attrition when it comes to special education teachers?
And that is a question for BPS.
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for that question, Councilor Lara. Thank you, Councilor Mejia, for having us. My name is Lauren Viviani. I'm the Interim Assistant Superintendent for Special Education, and I will be having a small presentation, a short one, as soon as this question period is done. But staffing shortages are on one of the slides that are forthcoming. There is a national shortage of special ed teachers across the board, and most definitely special ed teachers who are multilingual. So it's an area of intense work that we have to do as BPS to attract and retain teachers as we go forward. There's no question about that. As far as I kind of quickly jotted down some of the details of your questions around the cost of living and things like that. I don't know what that looks like, and we would need to look at the data for attrition rates. And I don't know if there's data around why people leave or why they go elsewhere, but definitely there is a great need for special ed teachers in particular.
Is there any? Sorry, you go ahead.
No. I was just wanted to know if there was any other follow-ups because the time is ticking.
Sorry, this is my last question, and I'm sorry that I'm having such issues with asking. I guess my question is particularly around recruitment. I know that in terms of investments and pay for teachers, that largely has to do with the BTU contract and the levels that they set. And so I'm curious about even if during the contract process, what you've been able to come to an agreement with the Boston Teachers Union, or what have you been able to offer, and what are some of the things that you've done in terms of recruitment? I know that we can't do the work if we don't have the people. And I think that we came across the same exact issue when we were having the BPS hearing around transportation and the monitors, is that we have to kind of grow grow how many people are monitors by almost 300% or something of that sort to cover all of the rides. And so I'm really curious about what you've been able to do and if there's anything that we can do to be supportive.
Really appreciate that offer of support, Councilor Lara, and I'm happy to provide a short update. I think our most recent agreement with the Boston Teachers Union is a really great step forward in making the kinds of changes you were just discussing. I think, sort of unfortunately for the timing of it, our hiring season is mostly over by the time that agreement was signed and settled and approved and ratified and all the steps. But as we go into our next hiring season, I'm really excited that our teachers already have a contract. The contract is settled going into next year. There's a guaranteed raise. The cumulative impacts of that raise will be significant, and adequately reward our teachers for the incredibly hard work they do on behalf of our kids. And so, we're hopeful that that salary makes a difference. But appreciate any opportunity to get the word out about opportunity for our amazing educators to come work for BPS. I think it's a really great place to teach, and we have the best kids in the country. So that's that.
Thank you for that, David. And I just want to note that we are running behind time. And Councilor Lara, I did give you a little bit of extra time, but we need to move on to our next colleague. So I am
going to... Chair, I have no further questions. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councilor Louis-Jean, and then I just have a few questions, and we're going to transition over to the special education hearing. So Councilor Louis-Jean, you now have the floor.
Hi, thanks everyone for being here. And I apologize that I had to leave halfway through for an emergency meeting, but I'm happy to be here. And I just want to thank all of you for the incredible work that you do. I know that it's really difficult work, but I think that it's really important that we get this right for our English language learners, for our students with special needs, because it can really make the difference between sort of like the lives that they live in the future. I, am often in schools with my younger cousins who are themselves learning English and trying to navigate SLIFE classrooms, trying to navigate city resources, being a translator for them and the parents. And I am particularly interested in learning more about the investments that we're making in our SLIFE classrooms and the number of schools that have SLIFE classrooms for those SLIFE students with limited or interrupted formal education. I know that there are schools, particularly in Mattapan, where we're seeing SLIFE students having to travel all the way from Alston Brighton because we don't have enough SLIFE classrooms, but we're investing more money in our English language learners. So if we could talk a little bit more about are the challenges that we're seeing in the SLIFE population, that would be incredibly helpful.
Thank you, Councilor Regin, for this question. I don't know if you know this, but I'm a former SLIFE teacher at Binka, so I would have had your family member.
I was at Binka last week for their parents. Yeah, I was a parent for my parent-teacher conference for one of my cousins. So
that's awesome, and they do such wonderful work there at Binka, and I think that some of the challenges we're facing are not unique to Boston, certainly not to the state. My recent DESI meeting on SLIFE, there has been exponential growth in SLIFE identification across the state, and many low incidence districts are grappling with what to do. And just for the public to know that SLIFE means students with limited or interrupted formal education. And so the way in which we identify those students in the district is that they're at the age of 9 and above. They've had some gaps in years where they may not have attended school. And especially now with COVID, we're seeing again an increase across the country of SLIFE identification. Where we have struggled this year is our seat capacity for SLIFE programs. The reason why it's so important that SLIFE programs are housed in schools with SEI programs, this sort of goes back to how we really embrace students as well as their transition and the social emotional needs of SLIFE students. especially depending on their history. So we want to make sure those students are placed in schools where there is a transitional SEI program that will also house them when they exit the SLIFE program. The SLIFE program is really intended to be, maybe a 1 to 3 year transitional program for students. So we are seeing an increase of students. We are also seeing an increase of SLIFE and students at SEI. And thus we've had this challenge again, because there are also city programs where there are not enough seats. So we're working with our planning and analysis team. Those programs and classrooms are staffed at 15 students per classroom at a capacity of 15 with 2 teachers. So they are the lowest, or at least ratio for English learner programs with the highest staffing because of their unique needs. Additionally, Superintendent Skipper is very much keen on the needs of SLIFE students and is investing in social workers, adjustment counselors / social workers for next year to potentially add about 15 bilingual social workers for SLIFE students where we have the highest capacity or number of students that attend. And we are also adding a SLIFE director to our office to be able to support the program. So there are some investments, future investments as well, that are going to be in the general funds that the superintendent is intending to support.
Thank you. I appreciate that response and all the work that you did, including at Binka. What's the percentage under we are in terms of so are we at, do we have 73%, 75% capacity for the number of SLIFE seats that we need? Where are we? And how do we get that number higher? I think you spoke to how do we get it higher. I'm just trying to get an understanding of where we are and where we want to be.
Yeah, great question. We are over the capacity for SLIFE. Unfortunately, we've had to add SLIFE classrooms this year. Not unfortunately, it's not the ideal situation in the timeline, right? Because it's sort of an onset of students. So we've added 8 new classrooms this year across the district. And we are also adding additional seats to particular classrooms and programs where there's capacity. And so we definitely have a challenge of SLIFE seats for this year. As far as next year, because of some of the transitions of grades and additional grades and mergers, as well as schools that have transitioned, we are looking at having hopefully have a sort of level set, if you will, because students were anticipating there will be more exits this year as well because of the schooling experience from last year and this year. So we're looking at the numbers in terms of entry of SLIFE and anticipated exits as well, and watching the increase in terms of enrollment. So
you had 8 classrooms. In an ideal world, how many SLIFE classrooms would you have had across the district?
Sorry, those are 8 additional classrooms.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really fluctuates. So, for example, a few years ago,
and there are schools that have just to be clear, there are schools that have no sort of SLIFE programs.
Exactly. We have a lot of schools, and the reason why we also wouldn't be able to add some of the SLIFE classrooms there is that they don't have an SEI program. For example, if it's a Haitian program, we also want those students to transition to a Haitian SEI program and not just move it to a gen ed classroom. They really need a lot of support to transition before they move into a gen ed or SEI.
Thank you.
Councilor Louisiana, because we have another panel slated, and I
just ask one short question about bilingual educators?
I just reset it once already, so I'm gonna 1 more minute.
Just one more, and this is just to highlight the issue that I hear. What I hear concern about is that in central office, we aren't necessarily honoring the folks who are doing the work of trying to bring in more bilingual educators and more teachers of color. And so I really want to put this a call out, whatever it is that we can do on the city council to increase the resources that we're providing to support the recruitment of more bilingual educators, of more instructors of color, which we know has an incredible impact on the lives of our children. Something else that I put out there and for folks to respond to is whether there are things that we can do around certification to make it easier for us to recruit and retain. So I have been made aware of this issue as folks are talking about it more, especially when it comes to central office and our ability to really retain the people who are working on these really hard issues. So if folks want to respond to that and talk about what central office is doing to better retain those folks who are working on bilingual education and bilingual education recruitment for teachers, and what we can do on the City Council to better support your work.
I can quickly touch on that we have partnered with the Recruitment Cultivation Diversity Office in the past. There have been some transitions in that office recently, but there also are staffing up, and so we are continuing to work with them. I think some of the challenges that we face also have to do with the state requirements and the bilingual ed endorsement qualifications. That's a new requirement. So for example, teachers who taught in a SLIFE program were sort of grandfathered in with the TBE, the old license.
Who are teaching the SLIFE program? Okay.
Exactly. So if anyone was teaching in a target language other than English, the new state law requires that they also meet the bilingual ed endorsement requirements, which means that they have to pass a state test. They also have to have 75 hours practicum. So again, we're working with partners. So one of our partners right now is Boston College, where we fund the teachers to take all of the courses and the application and the fees. But I think that that's the work that we have to really do in partnership with the Recruitment Cultivation Diversity Office as they lead that work and make sure some of our investments are already tied and aligned to that from the ESSER investments so that we can support that work. And
thank you, Farah, and thank you, Chair. Just want to put out there that we should be supporting the people in central office who are doing this work, especially people of color who are really trying to get us laser focused on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Louis-Jean. And so I just wanted to apologize for those folks who have been patiently waiting. We had technical difficulties to start with, and we also had to translate, so that consumed a little bit extra time, but it was well worth it. Considering the fact that we are over time here, you're lucky that I'm going to yield my time and not ask you all any questions, but I will state for the record that this particular hearing will stay in committee, and we'll be doing this again in the winter, because I don't think that we had enough time here to really unpack, and trying to do 2 hearings in one to accommodate BPS scheduling needs was a challenge. And so here we are. So I'll just state for the record, as an English language learner, as a previous member of the EL task force, and as a parent, and someone who grew up with a mom who did not speak a word of English, I share the same sentiments as Elsa, 30-something years navigating the Boston Public Schools, and here we are still having the same conversation, and the only thing that changes are the players. And so I remain hopeful that with a new administration and a new team, that we are going to get this right, because we have a responsibility to do this work in deep partnership with you all. And that is what I'm going to look for. And Mr. Bloom, I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to get you on the record on some of these return on investments, but I will just state for the record is that we've had a lot of transition in leadership. And it's really hard to stabilize when we have people who are moving into different positions. Every time we turn around, we have a new chief of this or a new superintendent of that. And, I just think that we need to just retain the folks that are in positions of power, quote unquote, and be able to build the infrastructure for the staff to be able to do their work. The next thing that I will be doing in the next time we bring people together is that I'm gonna invite a school administrator, a principal who's on the ground doing this work, because oftentimes we hear a lot of what BPS on the district level is doing, but we don't know how that's translating and how that's showing up in our schools. And I think that that's a missed opportunity. And I think that that is a key stakeholder voice that is missing in this conversation. Because there's always a difference of opinions of like what the district is saying is happening and what is actually happening. So with that, I am going to just thank you all, those who are here for the ELL hearing just thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. But we are going to transition to the next panel discussion. And I will start off with, because of due for timing issues, yet again, we're going to start with the administration as opposed to community voice. But what I'm going to do is do it in the order in which I believe is just. So we're going to do Lauren for docket 0724, but then I'm going to go to an advocate. Jakira, you will go after, and then I'm going to rotate so that there's equal time and voice for everyone. So Lauren, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia, and all the other councilors and all the representatives and advocates here today. I do have a couple of slides. I'm going to skip through several of them, but I do want to just share a couple of highlights for you. These are our priorities, and as Dr. Chen talked about earlier, engaging with parents as partners is one of our ways in which we're going to be doing all of these priorities. And we are working toward these. We have work to do to increase access to inclusive opportunities and a continuum of options at all BPS schools. And this, if I could just bring in Counselor, I think it was Laura's question about East Boston inclusion and how we are thinking about providing a broader range of services at a broader range of schools. So you don't have to necessarily go to a particular school that does inclusion, because more schools will be able to do so. Secondly, one thing we're working toward is accelerating positive outcomes for students with disabilities, especially multilingual learners with disabilities, by providing all the needed services as outlined on their IEPs, and really thinking about how we're looking at assessments and writing IEPs based on student need. And finally, we're working toward eliminating noncompliance with special education laws. This is a brief overview. John Mudd got it almost exactly right. There are about 4,000 kids who are English learners with disabilities. That's about 8%. Our district is about 20%, 21% students with disabilities, which is a little bit higher than national average. Our investment increased from last year to this year by $4.5 million. Much of that went toward FTEs. If there's questions about that, David and I can talk more about that coming up. There was, you had specific questions about our out-of-district tuitions. We have about 463 kids in out-of-district placements today. 402 of those are in approved private special education schools. You'll see that 11 students account for a great majority of the cost, and they are most substantially, they have the most substantial needs. So they're predominantly in residential placements. We spent $47.88 million on this, on out-of-district tuition. There's something called circuit breaker, in which state reimburses the state. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts reimburses local school districts. About a 3-year average of this reimbursement is about $21 million. We briefly touched on the staffing concerns and staffing statuses that we have in special education, and especially as it relates to bilingual special education. We have this many vacancies. Some of the things we're doing are we're contracting with recruiting companies to support high needs hiring. So we have contracts with companies who provide us with speech and language, OT, psychologists, those kinds of folks. We have new partnerships with colleges and universities. I have a meeting tomorrow with the new university to shrink the shortage and create pipelines to service, especially thinking about bilingual and special education and the intersection of those. We're reviewing our hiring and onboarding procedures. We recently learned about a parent mentor program, and so we're beginning to leverage that program to increase bilingual supports in classrooms And finally, we're hiring BPS staff who have retired to support these vacancies. We're especially the COAS, which is the Coordinator of Special Education. We absolutely need to attend to address bilingual special education teachers. And some of the ways we're starting to do this is by programs called speech and language pathologist assistants and occupational therapist assistants. They are, they're not the actual therapist, but they're assistants, and they're usually bilingual folks who can provide the services. They just can't do the assessments. So we have a lot of investment in those two programs. And then finally, my final slide is about the ESSER dollars. We have spent $6.7 million in federal relief for these three investments. The first is to expand inclusion and inclusive practices across the district. Again, speaking to the idea that right now kids have to go to a particular school to be included. They have to go to a strand. We really need to expand and provide a full continuum of options of LRE across all BPS sites. So that's something we're working toward. Providing compensatory services for students with disabilities has taken up, that's one of our larger investments, and this is to mitigate disruptions in services regarding transportation, as we all know about, or because of these staff shortages, or really any interruption of services. And this is an ongoing thing, an ongoing continual monitoring and updating of how we're providing compensatory services, when we're providing compensatory services. We really want to work with families to provide them. I have meetings regularly with the SPEDPAC who have said, well, the way that you have been providing compensatory services don't match what the families need. So we are adjusting the way we're doing it. How can we do it better in the summertime? How can we provide compensatory services remotely, in person, after school, during school breaks, all of these things. So those are that's the second investment. And then finally, we're building special education expertise to accelerate outcomes. We've hired a couple of consultants for early childhood special education to support inclusive ed for our youngest learners with disabilities. We've hired a consultant for the McKinley, and we have two procurements on track, one for the EI program and one for multilingual learners with disabilities. These folks will help us identify key performance areas and provide expertise to help, as we all have been talking about, what is the plan and how do we move forward and how do we make sure that we're accountable using these key performance indicators with these experts.
Okay, thank you, Lauren.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move on now to Jakira Rogers, who is the program lead for the Racial Equity and Access for MAC. And then I'm going to go to, I believe, Linda, and then I'm going to go to Roxy, just so that everybody knows what the order is. So, Jakira, you now have 5 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Counselor. Hi, everybody. First, I want to thank City Council for convening this hearing and focusing on both students who are ELs and students requiring special education. For too many years, the inequities have been starkly identified without meaningful reform. I'm hopeful that today's hearing will be a step forward in action and intervention. My name is Jakira Rogers, and I work with Massachusetts Advocates for Children, also known as MAC. Thank you, Counselor, for having me here tonight or this afternoon. We cannot have a conversation regarding the disparities in special education data, disparities in educational outcomes, or racial inequities within special education without acknowledging the impact of systemic racism. The systemic racism that I'm referring to is specific to the practices, policies, and norms that result in disproportionate educational outcomes and racial disparities. The same educational outcomes and racial disparities that push families out of the district and prevent Black and Brown students from receiving an equitable education. Let's be clear. Systemic racism is a widespread problem in our society, and we all need to do a better job of confronting it. We must also confront it within educational systems such as BPS. DESE has repeatedly found BPS special education programs in violation of state and federal laws. A 2020 audit of the district concluded that its special education services were in systemic disarray. When will the district be held accountable? Inclusive education requires equitable participation of all students in the educational system. All means all, not some, not most, not a few, all. This is not happening right now, nor has it happened consistently historically. We are here to disrupt the systemic racism that is embedded within BPS and reflected by the high rates of segregating students of color who have disabilities. Let's start with disparities in educational settings. BPS places students with disabilities in a substantially separate setting at a 29% rate, a rate that is more than 2 times higher than statewide and national rates. A substantially separate classroom refers to an educational setting that separates students with disabilities away from their general education peers for at least 60% of the time. Often, they are separated for the entire school day. This setting is a much smaller learning environment where all the students in the classroom have disabilities. What does this mean for those students? This means that students do not have the opportunity to learn alongside their non-disabled peers and are too often denied the opportunity to learn the skills necessary to live and work independently in the community as adults. Students are often placed in these classrooms based on lowered expectations about their ability to learn and discriminatory views based on disability and race. To provide some data on these disparities, for students aged 6 through 21 in SY 2022, 38% of white students with autism were placed in a substantially separate learning environment. 63% of Black students with autism were placed in a substantially separate learning environment. 55% of Hispanic students with autism were placed in a substantially separate learning environment. Again, we demand equitable educational opportunities for all, not some. In addition to evident disparities specific to the intersection of disability and race, there are also disparities when examining an additional layer of one's identity, gender. BPS refers a disproportionate number of Black and Latinx boys and English learners to special education. Referring students to special education leads to an increased likelihood that they will be placed in a separate environment that restricts their access to educational opportunities. BPS must stop segregating Black and Brown learners. BPS must examine and dismantle the current system, practices, and norms that determine special education eligibility to reduce disparities by race, gender, and English learner status, while also ensuring that such classifications are appropriate and consistent. The misclassification and overdiagnosis has to stop. When will these inequities drive change? The answer needs to be now. The disparities experienced by families that have been audited by DESE and most recently highlighted by the Council of the Great City Schools must be addressed. If these inequities continue to advance, we risk Black families leaving BPS for other school systems and districts. Most importantly, the district is violating the law by failing to provide all students with free and appropriate education. The district must own its history and be accountable to the changes that it wishes to see. I'm looking forward to collaboratively disrupting systemic racism, and I'm glad to see both of these topic areas elevated and prioritized amongst City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakira. So I'm going to go next to Linda, but I'm going to switch things up a little bit, Linda. If you had a PowerPoint presentation ready, I think it's important for us to just kind of let what Jakira just said kind of sink in for us, and I'm hoping that you could start your presentation or your comments kind of really just reading the room, if you will, the Zoom, and just kind of really leaning into some of the data that Shakira just shared with us, and just kind of giving you're just starting working in your new role, just, how is this landing? What what are some of your best practices? What are your ideas? What are we going to do? I'd like for you to start with that before going into what you've done, what BPS is planning. I just would like to just lean into that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Counselor, I actually was not planning on giving further remarks, but given your prompting, if you don't mind, I would love to respond, because the comments that have been made by Shakira are just sink deeply into the things that we have not done as a system for our communities of color, both our families, students, and our teachers and staff, quite frankly. And those are efforts that we're continuing to work on that are critically important. I think also for me, where this is also personal in so many ways, as someone who was an English learner, who was a school leader of a dual language school that supported students with disabilities, English learners with disabilities across a variety of settings. And it was really important as a justice issue to make sure that we provided the full continuum of services for our students, and to make sure I recruited the best staff that represented our students. All of those things are holistically important, and everything that folks are raising in this hearing, and thank you for having this hearing, critically important. I do believe the power of this work is doing this together, because you're not just a body with oversight and making resources available to us, but also working together side by side, which is why I'm so grateful to be in community with this group, because you want to roll your sleeves up and help us do this work on behalf of our students. And I say that with all of our partners here who are on, that I see in the Zoom room here. It is incumbent upon all of us to come together to deliver for our students. So I just appreciate the kinds of questions and the dialogue that we're having here.
Thank you. And I'm sorry to have put you on the spot. You were listed as a panelist here for some reason, so I thought you would be next, but I do appreciate you jumping in even though you were not prepared to do so. So thank you for doing that. I'm going to go next to Roxy, and followed by Edith Bazil, and then Cheryl.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Council Mejia. Appreciate it. Before I begin, I just want to note that, like many BPS parents, when I get off work shortly, I will be going off screen because I have to pick up my kids, but I will be listening in. I did write some notes I just wanted to share. First, to introduce myself, my name is Roxy Harvey. I am the current chair of Boston Sped Back, a BPS graduate, and I have special education children and siblings who actually went through the BPS system utilizing special education. I give a little bit of the history because the report brings back many memories, recent and like about 7 years ago, even with my own children, when my child was 3 years old, a Black Hispanic male, there was a very strong push to put him into sub-separate, an ABA strand. And I was basically told, either put him in this strand and get ABA hours, or put him in inclusion and get only 3 to 5. So you'll get a lot less service if you do inclusion. That was about 9 years ago for him now. However, just 3 years ago, I had a friend who I was at her IEP meeting, and she went through the exact same conversation with that IEP team, where they said the same thing of, oh, he needs ABA, so substantially separate's the right placement. So I say this to give the context of, as we continue to talk about changing and inclusion and mindset changes, that even someone like myself with younger children, as people have been repeatedly across, I think it was three superintendents, 4 assistant directors of special education. And I don't say that to give them a pass, because I don't care if you started yesterday or you've been with them for 20 years. You take up the mantle and do your job, you're getting paid for, because we can provide partnership and help as much as we want to. We're not the employees getting paid to do the job. I want to be very mindful and clear about that. But to see that we've been talking about this mindset change for so long, and I personally experience, I go to IEP meetings with friends who are going through the same conversations where someone is a little child, 3 years old. Think about that for a moment. We don't know what that 3-year-old needs, even if they're coming from early intervention. And for a team to sit around and basically kind of say, well, in order for you to get services, there's substantially separate classes where you need to go. So really, there is a mindset of putting 3-year-olds, and I want to be clear, Black and Latinx 3-year-olds, in the most restrictive setting from their first day in BPS. And honestly, even though all of the superintendents and assistant superintendents of special ed have said, oh, we're working on the change and we're doing the work, everyone said the same thing. But it hasn't changed, because I continue to see it occurring in these meetings. So I just want to acknowledge that, because as I read the report for the Council of Great Cities Schools, the 2022 report, that's what stood out for me personally. A lot of it was the same exact information from the 2009. I want to be clear. I thought the 2022 report was much more detailed. It acknowledged the multilingual learners with disabilities, specifically calling out that category, which I thought was important changes to the way they wrote the report. And some of the disaggregation they did, I thought it was really good. But if you look at the core of the changes that our school district needs to make, they're actually the same. So it is challenging to partner and to work in partnership when everyone says the right thing, but the end result of the guidance and support families give, it doesn't seem to be changing. So I think frequently when I think of this, also, it's like I hear a lot now of a new trend. I don't want to say trend, but when people are frequently speaking now, BPS leadership will say kind of like, as long as we, we'll get it right as long as we just service the multilingual learners with disabilities. And I want to be clear, we ask for a separate, they need to have their own plan. Special education students are not a rubber stamp where you're like, oh, we'll just do whatever we do for multilingual learners with disability, everything the same, stamp, stamp, stamp. The I in individualized education plan is there for a very specific reason. We have students that have very diverse disabilities, and within each of the disabilities, there's also a range of needs for each of those students. So it's a disillusion to just think that as long as you take one particular plan, you'll be servicing all of those special ed students, or one program even. So I just say that because I hear a lot of language surrounding kind of like, oh, well, if we do this component, we focus on this, then everything will be all set. And I think it's deeper than that. It needs to be more intentional, the work that's going to be done. And when I think of the hiring, because our students with disabilities, yes, they have intersectionalities of language, absolutely. They also have so many other intersectionalities that need to be considered. It is not enough to only say, well, we're going to look at the language spoken and think that that covers it. The culture, the ethnicity, there is so, and whether low income, single households, there's so many different things that make up that student, who they are and where their needs are met, that the layers need to be considered. And I think if we start to think about the layers along with how everything's being redesigned, honestly, because I always say special ed touches everything in this district. There's no such thing as a school without special ed. And I say that because I don't care if you're like, oh, well, the exam schools, they have special ed students too. So if we're not ensuring that the law is followed, that children's needs are met, and they're not more like almost shame for speaking one language or not speaking a particular other one or not being able to do something independently, then we're going down the same trajectory. We're going far left, far right, but we're missing the key points in the middle to really center and service students. So I did write down some questions that I wanted to just put forth to the district, honestly, because some of it is related to what families have said repeatedly. And it's like, when we ask, well, what happened? What did the ESSA money really do? Meaning that looking at special ed students, whether they're special ed students with disabilities, multilingual special ed students, where did the money go that directly impacted them is what my families keep asking. You know, we hear, oh, well, we know we created this office of inclusionary practices and we're staffing that office. We hired 2 new ADs, we're in the process. You're telling me about central office, heavy loading staffing, and our families are asking, there was enough money in there to service our students fully. So how did it look like at the school levels when our students were supposed to be getting services to change the impact of COVID and the things they've gone to? How did that money really specifically impact? I think we're looking for details that I've yet to hear. I hear too broad view. I don't hear how it really impacted students. And then my other questions, which I will say them here, and if you can answer them now or come back, especially since Council Mejia has said that we will be following up on this hearing again, it would be appreciated. And some of them are like, what are the specific changes being made to the management and leadership of the Office of Special Ed that will ensure there's enough authority to make district level policy changes that need to be made, which impact enrollment and student assignment? How is the district leading on establishing a clear vision and specific policies for inclusion if it's letting each school create a model for inclusion on their own timeline, which impacts the schools which families will have to choose from? What are the specific goals that BPS will commit to as part of responding to the 2022 Council of Great City Schools report? And what is the timeline for fulfilling those commitments? Is there really enough independent oversight and accountability to ensure the recommendations from the Council of the Great City Schools are fully implemented with urgency? Will or has BPS conducted and shared publicly an audit of the current BPS policies and practices that create barriers to providing inclusion and an evidence-based approach to special ed services aligned with federal IDEA laws?
All right, Roxy, you taking
two more questions.
No, oh my goodness.
I waited for 2 hours for y'all.
You're right. Yeah.
Although the systemic improvement plan has special education and safety in 2 different categories, there's clearly an overlap. What steps are being taken to address and prevent the bullying of students with disabilities? And as we keep hearing and agree that any changes will impact budget, enrollment policy, union contract, transportation, et cetera, please speak to the current policies and how it's currently a barrier to inclusion. Lastly, what and where are the special education policy reforms that will have special education work for all students with disabilities? Those are some of the things we really want to hear so that we can know how it's really going to change for the students we have in schools right now, right here, and moving forward. So thank you.
Okay, Roxy, I see how you move. I appreciate you taking up your space because this is how we do. So I'm all about parent empowerment. So I'm gonna let you live a little bit longer. In the interest of keeping things moving, I'm going to ask the administration to, when we move into the question and answer portion, to please, for the record, address some of the questions that Roxy has brought up. But I'd like to move over to another dear friend of mine who I know has been in the trenches here doing this work like nobody else, and has been inside and outside, so understands the game that we all tend to play out here. So without further ado, the one and only Edith Bazil, you do have 5 minutes, so don't even think I'm gonna let you live like I did Roxy, okay?
I hear you. I'm not gonna have to reclaim my time. I'm gonna try to keep it right to the time. But I just want to say, first of all, this is about history and the opportunity to create another legacy. And if we don't look historically at what happened in this district, pre-desegregation, the birthplace of education in 1635, where Black folks in Massachusetts were in slavery, and the opportunity to move from crisis to opportunity and create a legacy that is different, because nothing has been different. We're kicking the can down the road. We are pushing things, but we're not changing. And so I think there has to be a referendum on race and racism, and specifically anti-Black racism, because that's where it started. And BPS has never addressed the trauma of what happened to our students during desegregation, when rocks were thrown at them, when bottles were thrown at them. When my 2 sisters dropped out of school, they went to South Boston High because it was terrorizing. And these were adults attacking children just because they were trying to get an education. We need a referendum on racism. And we also need to address the continuing problem of segregation that continues to plague this two-track system where you just have to look at the demographic population and you'll know whether it's a high-achieving school or a low-achieving school based upon its demographics. So I just want to talk about, we talk about Black students and we try to put students and the work in silos. We have Black students across ethnic and linguistic groups. We have Black students who are Cape Verdean, who are Haitian, who are Afro-Latino, who are Somali, who come from the diaspora, who come from the continents of Africa, the countries in Africa, but we also have Black monolingual English dialectical learners that we completely dismiss. And we need to focus on their linguistic, their cultural needs, because they have a heritage, they have multiple identities. So we really need to look at the intersectionality of students. I want to echo what Roxy said about, not pooling students who are English learners with students with disabilities because they have different needs and the pedagogy is different. The approach is different. We know our ELs who have disabilities are going to need native instruction, ESL, SEI, in addition to the specialized instruction and the accommodations that are outlined in the IEPs. But it is dangerous to lump those two populations together, and that's why the I in individualization is really critically important. But I want to focus on literacy because literacy is the gateway and the foundation of learning. Most of our students, many of our students, a large population of our students end up in special education because of literacy issues, and that needs to be confronted. We know that students with disabilities struggle with literacy, and the referrals come from their challenge in literacy. And so how can the district improve student outcomes without strong tier 1 instruction? The research tells us that 95% of students can be taught to read on grade level by the end of first grade, 95%, regardless of intellectual disability, regardless of EL status, regardless of gaps in schooling, regardless. This can be done. The research is there. So we need to really think about using that. But let me give you a statistic. So before the pandemic, only 30% of third Black graders were able to read on grade level. After the pandemic, and I know we're still in the midst of it, it went down to 20%. This didn't happen to white students. It didn't happen to Asian students. The dip occurred with Black students, with ELs, who are at, I believe, only 87% of ELs are reading on grade level in third grade. Only 88% of students with disabilities. So we are failing our students in the most fundamental and foundational skill that is necessary in order to access curriculum, which is literacy, the ability to read and extract meaning and write independently about what you read, to pull out ideas, have a discussion and all that. If you cannot participate in that, then you're not going to be successful in school. And so this is where the failure occurs. And it is a referendum on our early childhood literacy curriculum. So why isn't it supporting these third graders? So a third grade, our MCAS 2022 says that 80% or higher students who are ELs, Black, Latinx, and students with disabilities are failing. We need to look at tier 1 instruction instead of having a wait to fail model. We should be talking about prevention. And the other thing I want to mention is, as the district moves towards inclusion, we have an old saying in special education is not a place, inclusion is not a place. It is the services that are provided. So what are the expectations of inclusion? This district is top heavy with administration. And so my challenge is, how do you support what's going on in the classroom? So how do you expect teachers to address EL issues, to address special education issues, core instruction, and provide reading interventions? The district needs to think about, how do you front load the supports to the classroom instead of the top heavy administrative pool, because I see more and more hiring at the top. But what is the specialized support that is being provided in the classroom? What is the specialization that is brought to the classroom? We don't have reading specialists in every school. Why is that? and how does the district proceed reading and literacy specialists? That's really important. So I see your finger going up. So I'm gonna finish. I'm gonna finish right now. What I like to say that it's time to act boldly and systemically without any excuses. Instead of top-heavy administration, there must be additional supports in the classroom with the specialization to address the learning needs in the classroom through prevention. This is the moment to lean forward from crisis to opportunity with best practices, promising practices, and research. It's time to look at what's working and scale success. BPS needs to confront anti-Black racism that denies students and families rights and confront policies that uphold racism. Opportunity gaps are policy decisions. We know the data. It hasn't changed for decades. BPS needs innovation, innovators, and innovating. And we know that the answers are already available. Where are they? They emerge from the community. Those who are served understand the design flaws in what is in place right now. And those are the voices that need to be at the table, not just to be listened to, but to actively plan and implement what needs to be dismantled, because you cannot fix a broken system. You have to dismantle it and you have to reconstruct it. And so that's what's needed. So my final word is that BPS must act with the community to create an effective plan and shed the belief and practice that the system knows best. It does not. The gaps that exist are a result of policy decisions. BPS must center racial equity in order to go beyond short-term change. Otherwise, change will continue to be short-term and buried in rich rhetoric and poor implementation. Systems design, the last sentence, that fundamentally changes historical inequities must be the deep and urgent work that is done with the community, not to the community. And it begins with really having a referendum on race. If white students were failing, would have been done. We would not have this conversation. If exam schools were failing, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It would be done tomorrow. Change does not take time. James Baldwin said, you asked my grandmother to wait, my grandfather, my sister, my brother, my uncle, my nieces, my nephews. When will you take the time to do your work? The time is now. It's about action. Stop intellectualizing the work by rotating the data. We already know what it says. Let's get to the action of the work.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Edith. I knew you, and fire next time, okay? Because you always bring it, and so really do appreciate. And I hope for, BPS, as we continue to move through our relationship and trust building exercise that we have here, because we're setting, this is the bar, right?
Oh, I forgot my question. I'll just ask one. I'll ask one. I had a bunch, but can I just ask one, please?
One.
Who is the literacy leader with the expertise to create an infrastructure, a framework for literacy rooted in prevention, tier 1 instruction with the interventions that follow? I want to know who that person is, because we had someone who was, the department was dismantled, and I want to know who has a literacy expert. And I'm talking about the resume. I'm not talking about the position. I'm talking about the expertise. Thank you.
I love you.
I love you more.
I see y'all, all of y'all. But listen, I for those who know me and have been following my work in the education space, I'm not here to have a conversation about a conversation. We are tired of that, right? So this moment is really about what are we hearing, and then what are we doing collectively, not for, but with the people who are living the realities and or doing the work. And I think that we have to make a commitment to having a different conversation, one that begins with, here's where we're at, here's where we need to be, and here's where we're going to get to and how we're going to get there, right? Because all of that gets missing in a lot of these conversations, right? And so that's why I've been pushing for less PowerPoint and more conversation, and creating space for folks who are living these realities and doing the work as community activists and parents and students and staff to really lead and set the stage for what the discussion is going to look like, because then that gives BPS an opportunity to marinate on that and come back with some thinking around it, right? So that we are forward moving. I don't want to come back in the next hearing that we have in regards to this conversation and start from the beginning. Like my goal is to do another check-in and see what are the things that we said we were going to do and how are we coming along in that journey, right? And what are the barriers that we're facing and how do we have to reset? Because otherwise, we're going to repeat the same cycle of lip service here, and I don't want anyone to experience that. So thank you, Edith and Roxy, and Lauren and Linda, who have spoken so far. I have one more person, Cheryl, and then I am going to ask a few questions because I've been really patient. So Cheryl, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I'm a member of BPS for Families for COVID Safety, otherwise known as FAMCOSA. I'm a parent to a 4th grade special needs student who attends the Dever Elementary. I reside in South Boston. My son has been in special education classes since K2 due to his emotional impairments, which impact his way of learning. He was originally at the Perkins Elementary School to begin his K2 year, then was transferred to the Dever due to his special accommodations he needed. My experiences with special education have been a mixed bag. Since I've received services for my son, they've seemed to have been followed in school. But once the pandemic hit, we had additional challenges. Because of my son and myself, we both suffer from asthma and rare genetic blood disorders. That makes it harder for us to fight off infections. It's also it got pretty confusing on how these services were going to be addressed. When classes went remote, it was very hard for him to focus on a Chromebook for extended amounts of time. Plus, it was hard to identify his challenging needs through Zoom at the time. My son learned best with visual aids and reminders when trying to navigate during the pandemic. It took time for him to adapt in this new way of learning, but he did fairly well. Once school returned to in-person learning, he began to show more of a lower tone when speaking and began to transition into what we know as baby talk. When something was unfamiliar with him, when a word was new to him, he couldn't sound it out, or he would simply replace it. I noticed a lot of his work that had come home had a lot of misspelled words or was very unreadable handwriting, which was not okay for a child his age. I believe in this section, more training is needed for teachers to identify when a child is having a problem. On several occasions, I have asked for extra things to be sent home with him, but this never happened. In addition to the educational issues regarding special education and BPS, I've also been concerned about my son's exposure to COVID in school. On June 13th, 2022, the mandate was dropped for BPS just 2 weeks before school was letting out for the summer. And within that window of time, my son began to show symptoms of COVID. It was confirmed on June 21st that indeed he was positive for COVID. Within the first 72 hours of him having this illness was very challenging and scary. Became close to being admitted to the hospital for his high fevers and asthma. Luckily, with home care, he began to improve. On the same date that he began to improve, I became infected with my second round of COVID, this placing my long-awaited surgery on hold. While my son was home with COVID, doing his schoolwork was challenging at times. There were things he couldn't remember to do or just simply understand. It got got him very frustrated. What could or should be in place is the Google Classroom for when a child is out so that they can see the teacher's instruction on assignments in real time. If the masking mandate had been kept in place, I don't believe my son would have contracted COVID, which put both his health and his learning at severe risk. This is what happens when public officials disregard science, remove a protection too soon. BPS can ensure this does not happen again. The group that I belong to, FAMCOSA, urges BPS to bring back the universal mandate, pooled PCR testing, and during an outbreak at a particular school, at the beginning of citywide surges, after vacations such as the December break, we also want to emphasize that when a universal masking requirement is in place, there can still be flexibility for students with special needs who may not be able to wear a mask. There are also special masks that allow mouths and lips to be seen, which can be fully used, especially with child with special needs and ELL learners. When the majority of students, teachers, and staff are masked, this offers greater protections for students who cannot. In Boston, many children come from Black and brown communities. They have been hard hit by COVID already. Many students live in multi-generational homes. Exposures at these mean virus can spread to family members who are at high risk. A study that was just done in the New England Journal of Medicine also showed that universal masking works. Masking protects our children, students, and community against not just COVID, but other respiratory viruses. If BPS opts against mitigation measures during COVID surges, that is a form of structural racism. We also know that BPS buildings are on average over 80 years old and do not have adequate ventilation. In fact, 3/4 of BPS do not have HVAC. Mayor Wu has promised to improve school buildings with the Green New Deal for BPS, but thus far, plan does not seem to include upgrading ventilation systems to fresh air and filtration. The city must revisit in our schools and communities, or reinvest in our schools and communities, so that the students and staff can have the ventilation needed to protect from COVID, as well as being cool in the summer and warm in the winter in ways that energy is efficient. Good ventilation also enhances the learning environment, which is also important not just for special needs students, but for all students. The holidays are coming, along with it, a flu season, a season that health providers are calling a triple-demic: COVID, flu, RSV. BPS has failed to listen to communities that have been impacted by COVID, including families with students with special needs. I call on BPS, Mayor Wu, to protect the students of all with special needs and all other students included, staff and communities through universal masking, pool testing, and improved ventilation.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you very much. Really do appreciate your testimony and advocacy. I believe we're going to, I know we have people signed up for public testimony, but before we go there, I just want to make a few comments, and then I'm going to ask the administration to react to some of the questions that were posed by some of the folks that have testified. You know, having worked in the space, these conversations are not new. However, what I find to be startling in this whole conversation that we've had here is that we haven't named something that is happening due to the chronic neglect of our special education students and our EL multilingual learners, is that we're feeding the school to prison pipeline without really realizing that the role that we're playing in doing just that. And I think that as we continue to navigate these conversations, we have to look at that data and see how we are failing our students who are graduating unprepared to thrive beyond high school. How we are over-disciplining students, how we're by creating separate classrooms, how we're not giving young people an opportunity to learn social and emotional learning skills. So there's just a lot here that I think, is important to name, that the school to prison pipeline situation is real, and we have to hold ourselves accountable to how we're feeding it when we are neglecting the supports that students need. So I want to name that. But before I go into public testimony, I would think it's important for the administration. There was a lot of questions posed here. Not that you're going to be able to get through all of them. The good thing about the way we have these hearings is that when questions are not answered, our central staff submits these questions as a formal request to BPS, and then the information is supposed to come back to us. So there might be some questions that you have answers to today, and some questions that you will have to do a little bit of digging and get back to us. In the interest of time, wanted to see if anyone, Lauren, Linda, or David, that are still here, are able to answer any of the questions that have been posed by our panelists.
Councillor Mejia, I'll begin and certainly invite my colleagues to join in and try to answer, excuse me, as efficiently as possible given the time constraints. I think first and foremost, it's not lost on us the comments that were made around the history of what has happened in this city for our Black communities, for our other communities that are also marginalized. I mean, that is that I appreciate the call to action around changing that history and creating a new legacy together. And I think and acknowledge that it is hard sometimes when you have different people that you're constantly working with. And that is something that the superintendent has been really trying to change, that we not only have diverse representation in leadership, but also to retain staff. Because you all are not, we don't want to put you in a place of always repeating things and waiting for things to change. We must change things now. So I want to acknowledge that. I also want to acknowledge that some of the questions are around access for all students to grade level instruction. That is something that we are doubling down on during this administration, is to make sure that students are able to do that. And when I mentioned being able to meet the needs of English learners or our multilingual learners and students with disabilities, it wasn't a monolith of that can be applied to everyone else. It means that we have the capacity and knowledge of how to differentiate and specially design instruction with students in mind. If we have the capacity to do that across the system, that means we have the capacity to serve all students. And our primary focus is serving the students with disabilities and students who are multilingual learners. That is our priority. And providing the reading instruction, and Edith, I completely agree with you. Our students need, and the superintendent is, as we get into the next budget season, I think you'll see those commitments. We are working on making sure that reading specialists are in schools, not only at the elementary and early elementary levels, but also at secondary. That is a critical aspect of what we need to be doing better. Absolutely. And the literacy focus we have is also in content area, in disciplinary literacy, which I do recognize is not the same as learning how to read and write and speak and listen and have all of those ELA skills that are necessary for students to access content. And those are things that we're working on as well. But we do agree the urgency is now. We have the use of ESSER funds to be able to provide more training and interventionalists, and that is work that is currently underway. In terms of some of the questions that Roxy asked as well, around special education and the response to the special, the Council of the Great Cities Schools report. There are many parts of that report, and I think there's a lot of agreement where, unfortunately, and I say that with all gravity, those are not new things or unknown issues to us. And to Roxy's point, especially from the 2009 report, we must do something about this now. And also to her point around special ed touches everything, We are trying to make sure that we are systematically dismantling those things in terms of our enrollment processes, how IEPs are constructed, what processes we have in place for students, so that the IEP is not the only way to get supports that are needed. There are many things that we need to be able to dismantle. And I appreciate the comment about not just dismantling, but reconstructing things that work moving forward. So there are many of those pieces, and we are trying to make sure we sequence these things in a way that we can actually get these things done and to be able to sustain this. And so in terms of the inclusion question and the concern, which I think is very, we really take that seriously. It is not about every school figuring out what plan works for themselves, because I totally agree. That is not equitable, and it is not a way for families to be able to expect excellence from us consistently across the system. We are beginning with learning from what is happening in each of the school contexts that are in the first cohort of schools to be able to make sure that we don't just quickly put together models that have not been thoroughly vetted to ensure that they meet the needs of the students the very students that we are talking about here in this conversation. We want to make sure that we are really thoroughly vetting the types of teacher supports, resources, direct student supports and services that are necessary, and how that is calculated through models and resources to support that moving forward. So while we are focusing on individual schools, we are learning from that to be able to have a set of a strategy for inclusion that is clear to all families. That includes, so a lot of this right now, our inclusion planning teams in the first cohort of schools involve family members. In fact, I was at the launch of the professional learning series, I believe it was November 10th. And there were family members on there because, to what all of you are saying, we must do this with our families and not to. And so the family input and representation is really important in our ability to construct the models that will work for the system. And we cannot do that without consulting and partnering with our families. And so that is part of the process. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. We asked you questions, and we expect you to deliver on that. And so thank you for taking the time to unpack some of that. I want to also note that, there was a comment made around the top heaviness of central staff. And, I'm just curious about, the number of different folks in terms of leadership roles that have changed. And so I'm curious about when are we going to hire, what the timeline is for hiring someone for OMME as well as OSE leaders. And, what does that look like? Because that's part of the piece of the puzzle, right? Is being able to have some stability and leadership in place. Can you just give us a timeline about when that is potentially going to happen?
Sure. The superintendent has committed to ensuring that we do a thorough process to ensure that we can attract candidates that are highly capable and that will remain. I think that is a very critical component that you mentioned. And so she's engaged, we're engaging with recruiters to be able to do that. One of the challenges for this time of the year is that we're off cycle in terms of hiring and being able to recruit someone or ensure that someone remains in their position. So what we are going to do is reach out to SPEDPAC and EL Task Force to make sure we have representation of the community on these hiring committees as well.
Right. So this is probably where, and then I'm going to kick it over because I'm being advised that we only have 5 more minutes with the BPS administration panel, is that this is something that I think that we're always in crisis mode and just trying to just catch up, right? And so I think this is a perfect example of what are some of the short-term things that we can do to make sure that while we're waiting, that things are still happening, right? That there are things in place to support, like whether it be, working with Edith, who has, many years of experience. Not that she wants to go back to BPS or the district for that matter, but I'd like to hear you all start thinking about plan A and B and C, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And I think while I do appreciate the challenges, that I think that this is an opportunity for us to be innovative, right? So what else can be put in place in the meantime? That is the challenge. That I think as you all continue to navigate this, is that there always has to be a plan A, B, and C, given just the things that we see.
I think part of it, I want to recognize Lauren and Farah for their leadership, because they are, even though we've posted the positions, they are working, with full commitment in terms of the work. And we are setting up structures. We are looking at policies and making those changes. We are also working with our Office of Equity. And in fact, both teams have really revamped their processes and looking at policies through a racial equity lens. So there are things that are happening regardless of what our current status and the permanence of these positions is. And I just want to reassure, and the superintendent also has a special advisor who will be able to help us get moving.
I appreciate that, Linda. We can go back and forth on this for a little bit, but I'm not going to do that in the interest of being respectful of the folks that are still waiting for public testimony, and that I know that you guys have to wrap, is that these are not the roles that they were hired for, right? So then what we're asking people to do is more than what they signed up for, right? So then that also impacts the work that they're doing and their ability to do what they've been asked or signed up to do. So I just think it's important for us to acknowledge the fact that this is also impacting the services that our families expect, and it's just something that I want to name. But I'm going to ask. I know that Fabian, who is a C-Plan leader, a special SPED PAC previous co-chair of I think the chair of SPED PAC, and has had many experiences navigating the Boston Public Schools through her own lived experience, is here to sign up for public testimony. So I wanted to just honor that she's been patiently waiting. And so I'm going to give you 2 minutes, Ms. Fabian. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Council Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to share and thank you, everyone. I'm not going to repeat much that Edith and as well Roxy has shared. And just to piggyback on that, on the literacy, and I believe that Linda just answered of what is coming up, but also what I want to share on that, what is the plan of what the district has on, beside the literacy, on the social emotional impact of what is the special ed, because not only I can see of what not only so many students on the special ed is going through, my own child, I have a 15-year-old right now, special ed, dyslexia, ADHD combined, anxiety, depression, now mood disorder. I'm dealing with right now, going back and forth in emergency room, and with anxiety, with everything, and impacting and doing so many kids I'm going to see in that emergency room, and there's no beds to take them. There's no beds. We hear that. We hear parents are crying for help. And the fact that teachers doesn't even know how to deal with the students when they come in with that impact. They come in with all this anxiety and all this depression, and they coming in and parents they're looking for help. We have ways of supporting them. So teachers are not even know how to recognize them. We have lack of social workers. We don't have enough therapists in the school to help them or to recognize, how to identify, how to talk to the students. So the main thing sometimes they call BEST. I work with mental health families. They call BEST. BEST takes a long time to come in to assess those students. And if they call the police, the way they treating those 10-year-old, 9-year-old, they're putting their face on the concrete. They're putting those black and brown kids, they're treating them like criminal. It's just hurting to my core to see the way that they are treating those kids. I'm going to school after school. It's not only that we're not giving them the education, we're putting them to the prison, to the pipeline zone, and in the way that we're treating them, what are we doing to those kids? What are we doing to them? So we're not teaching them the right way. We're not giving them the education they deserve. And then they going back to the mental health, and then that more destroying to them. So I'm just asking, what are we doing to our babies? What are we doing? How can we help? What other ways we can support them? We have enough resources in Boston. We have tons of doctors. We have hospital. We don't have enough bed. We know it's a epidemic everywhere. But in social workers, there's a way of training. We can find ways we can train. We can talk to the teachers. We can help them. We can support the teachers, the social workers to train them. How can we be able to impact the same way that we can say the teachers can be able to help, but how can we impact the teachers, the lunch teachers, they have eating disorders. They have so many impactful another ways. So I'm asking you guys, what other ways we can be able to help and support those students? Thank you.
Thank you, Fabian, and thank you so much for making time to be here and lending your voice and helping us really put a lot of things in perspective, because we're talking a lot about technical, right? Here's the service, here's the IP and all this, but there is a real issue here that is underlining all of it, is the social and emotional well-being and the traumatic impact that navigating the Boston Public Schools when you have additional needs that often gets lost in these conversations. So I really do appreciate Fabian bringing it into the space, and for all of us to really think about how these things go hand in hand. And when we're thinking about an IEP, that there's an extra layer of well, what about if this happens? I don't think that we do enough of what about this, because that's why we always end up in these sort of conversations. So foreshadowing and also being able to see the whole child and the whole family as we navigate these conversations is really going to be key to our success. And, I'm making a commitment as the chair of education. One is because we started late, and two, we had to do, because the legislative cycle ends in a few weeks, we wanted to make sure that these two dockets were heard during this legislative cycle. But the goal really is to refile them in January and then continue. And then we'll do each one separately so that we can really dive into the data and to some of the questions that were proposed here. And my hope is that those who are here, and if you are still here, because things are always changing in BPS, if you are still here, really to come back with some very specific action plans, outcomes, and how you're going to measure success. I think that also gets lost. What does success look like? And also number of students. We hear we're going to do X, Y, and Z. I'd like to get into the nitty gritty. On the return on investment is based on your outputs, how many students were served and what capacity, and what was that outcome of that. I need specific examples of individual cases that you all can point to, because we don't hear that often. And I think that level of input would really be helpful to us. Budget season is around the corner, and this is not an opportunity to ask for more money. David, don't be shaking your head like you think I'm going to say yes. No. There will be no more money given out until we have a real solid action plan of what is it going to look like. We can't continue to approve budgets and then come back a year later with a PowerPoint presentation of some highlights. No, I think that's why we're going to have another hearing before we dive into the budget season, because we want to make sure we understand where we're at. What's the benchmark? Where are we starting from, right? Where do we need to get to, and how we're going to get there, and how each dollar matches that outcome. That is the level of input, David, that I'm going to be looking for the next round of the hearings that we'll have on these two very specific issues. And this is on the record and it's being recorded, and I will play the rewind button if you come back with something else, okay? Because this is what this moment calls for. And this is what collaboration looks like, right? It's not just about holding BPS accountable. It's about listening to the voices of the people and then putting a plan in place with the people that we can feel we've had a role in designing. You've heard a lot of really great ideas and some really good suggestions and questions that were posed. It's an opportunity for you all to reflect on that and come back with, we heard you, really heard you, and here's how we're going to address what we've heard.
First off, yes, and looking forward, Councilor Mejia, for you continuing to hold me and the rest of my colleagues accountable, because I know you will. Just a quick plug for those ESSER questions that were asked for our ESSER website, which has our ESSER plan updates, which we publish every 6 months, available in all 9 of our major languages. There's a new update coming out in the middle of December to be ready in time for the December 14th, I believe is the date, school committee meeting. That will also be translated into all of our major languages. It includes school level action plans for spending ESSER dollars and the students that each program serves. If you even just Google Boston Public Schools ESSER, you'll find it on our website. So just a plug for that resource.
Yeah, David, and you know what I would like to see on that website are parent testimonials, validating that the services that were rendered actually made an impact. Because that's also
not trying to get that for December 14th, but I hear you and I'll work on it.
Yeah, that for the next hearing in the later in the winter, I would love to see. Here's how the return on investment played out for this particular family. Like, we need to hear some of that, just so you know. Like, it would just be helpful to, because then it humanizes this conversation. It just turns those numbers into real stories that we can get excited about and say, okay, yeah, we're making progress. I think that that's also missing. We have lost hope, and I don't want us to lose faith, right? That's all we have left, is that we have to believe that this system, once we redesign it, dismantle it and then redesign it, is going to do right. It's been 50 plus years, and we can't. I'm holding myself accountable. I'm the chair of education. In my term, I have to feel like I've had something to show for it. And if it's to say we were able to fix 2 or 3 things, then I feel like we've done our job. So I have to be accountable to these conversations in partnership with you all as well, right? So I just want you to know that it's not just about y'all, it's, you know, the district counselors too, you know, and the at-larges. The district counselors all have schools in their districts. You know, we need to create opportunities for the district counselors to also adopt some of their schools and figure out the role that they can play in helping to support. Because the education committee should not be the only place where we're talking about education. All of these things need to be part of everything that we talk about here in the city. But I wanted to just make sure, because there is one, I'm not sure if there's anyone signed up. Cora, if you could tell me, or who's ever from central staff still with us, thank you so much. But wondering if there's anyone else here for public testimony. I do have one public testimony that I want. It was a letter that was written to us that I'm going to read into the record. Normally we don't do this, but it's important. This parent wants to remain anonymous, and in the spirit of making sure that we lift all voices, and all means all, Jakira, right? So I want to make sure that this parent has their voice read into the record through us. So I'm just curious if anyone has, if there are any other public testimony, or if anyone from BPS has any closing remarks. I'm going to end the hearing after I read this public testimony into the record.
Hi, Counselor. It's Cora. The only person that we had signed up was Danielle Tierney.
Okay, well, Danielle keeps playing peekaboo, and she's no longer here. So I am going to, with that, I know the administration had a hard stop, and I just want to thank you for staying a little bit longer. We stayed late, so your presence here is deeply appreciated, and it does not go unnoticed that you did have a 5 o'clock hard stop, but you stayed, and that means a lot to the folks who are here and also the ones who are tuning in, that you stayed as long as you did. So I just wanted to end with some gratitude with you all. I'm going to do one word closing. Everybody just one word about how you're feeling now that you're leaving. I'm going to go first to Edith. One word. You're on mute. You. One word, Edith.
My word is going to be driven.
Awesome. Shakira.
Eager.
Eager. Awesome. Cheryl.
Success.
That's okay. Great. I'm going next to Lauren.
I'm grateful.
Beautiful. Linda.
Impactful.
Awesome. David.
Humbled/overwhelmed.
Humbled and overwhelmed. Okay, got two. Roxy.
Determined as always.
Right. Fabian.
I'm hopeless.
Hopeless.
Oh, no.
Okay. I hear you. I feel grateful that we can do this work collaboratively, and that there's so much commitment from the folks who are in this Zoom right now to get it right. So deeply grateful. With that, I am going to read the public letter into the hearing that we have right now, just to honor Family Voice, and just want to thank everyone for participating. I will be reading this into the record, and wanted to thank Central staff for helping us get things rolling today. So here it goes. Boston City Councilor at Large, Julia Mejia. Dear Councilor Mejia, I would like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude in allowing this letter to be heard. I am not disclosing any names in this letter, as some of the faculty at my son's school has started to give him a hard time as a result of my inquiries with regards to ensuring that his IEP is followed or lack thereof. This is to protect my son. My son is currently a 9th grader at a Boston Public High School. He has a diagnosis of ADHD and a specific learning disability in math. He has had an IEP since he was in the 5th grade. At the time, he attended a private Catholic grammar school in Boston. He then went on to attend a private Catholic middle school/high school in Boston. Both schools, while they did not have the capacity or resources to fully execute his IEP, they did an amazing job assisting him as best they could. At the end of the 8th grade year, it was decided by his school and us that he would benefit from Boston Public Schools and all the resources they have. As a result, I registered him for Boston Public School, and we found out in early June that he was placed at a high school across town. At the start of the school year, I submitted an email to the guidance counselor of the high school inquiring about who the IEP facilitator was at the school to discuss my son's IEP. The guidance counselor informed me of the person. I emailed them and was subsequently told by that person that all teachers had received my son's IEP and would implement the necessary accommodations for him. My son's problems became known when his father and I attended the school's open house in mid-October. We met with most of his teachers, including his math teacher. During our meeting with the IEP, he mentioned that my son is very unfocused in the classroom and is struggling with the schoolwork. The following week, I emailed the IEP facilitator again to let them know that the math teacher had no idea about my son's IEP, and how could we be ensured that his IEP was being observed in not only just in math, but in all of his other classes. They responded by letting us know that they was only filling in at the school at the time. The facilitator had forwarded my email to the assistant director for special education at Boston Public Schools. I had a telephone conversation with this person on November 3rd. I was told that they would reach out to the school and figure out what was going on. During this time, I had emailed my son's guidance counselor at his school again, inquiring about the IEP, who the new facilitator is, etc. The guidance counselor spoke with him and told him, "Your mom is very intense, quote unquote. She is blowing up my email, quote unquote. And your mom is pissed at me, quote unquote." I feel that those comments made by the guidance counselor were uncalled for and inappropriate. Each email that I have seen has been respectful and assertive. On November 7th, the guidance counselor called to ask what I wanted for my son from the school. I told him that I wanted his IEP to be recognized, and I listed a few of the accommodations on his IEP, such as, to name a few, preferential seating, visual aids, extra time for tests. Excuse me. He assured me that they would speak to the teachers and have these accommodations implemented. At the time, I told him to please stop mentioning to my son his feelings on my communications with him. He denied ever saying those comments to my son. My son's resource room teacher brought his IEP to him during the class so that he could read it. They told him that they're all, quote unquote, under pressure now, and that it's a losing battle. Excuse me, my son did not need to hear these words. I have become worried about his safety at the high school. There have been 2 incidents now where the school has had an issue with gun safety. There's also been fights that have broken out in the classroom. He has overheard comments about kids sneaking guns into the school. He doesn't know who, and he never has seen a gun, but it's enough to make him rattled. This is not a learning environment that I want for him, and I fear that this is contributing to already lack of focus, which has now turned into fear. I am extremely disillusioned and disappointed in Boston Public Schools after this experience. We took my son out of a private Catholic school to attend a Boston Public School to get the help he needs and deserves. The irony of it is that he received more help from his previous school than he is getting at his present school. As of today, November 28th, it has been 3 months and my son has an F in math and has been made to feel like an inconvenience to his teachers and has lost motivation entirely. As far as I'm concerned, the school is not safe and not supportive of its students. We are exploring our options to move him to another school. However, it is my feelings that Boston Public Schools have failed my son, and I don't want him in that kind of environment again. Thank you very much for listening. Best, frustrated and concerned parent. And I was not on screen. I wasn't sure who was still here, but I'm glad to see that you all stayed to listen to this, because this is why we're here today. This is the call to action for us to recognize that we can't lose any more of our families, any more of our students to the school to prison pipeline, and we have work to do. So I'm here for that work. I know my council colleagues are as well, and I know BPS and the administration is up for the task, and more importantly, the parents and the community activists are not going to quiet down. If anything, we're all just going to get louder. So let's go forward in the new year with setting the best intentions and always assuming best intentions so that we can get this right.
And if I may, Dr. Viviani, you're aware of that particular case that she just described, because that communication, something similar came to you also. So I would just ask that we do more to reach out to that family again, because we're not, I don't want to pretend we don't know about some of that, not giving any details, but there's a way for BPS to communicate with that particular family and those concerns that were previously raised.
Thank you.
It's not the first time. It's not when I said I'm hopeless, That's not the first time I'm hearing that. I'm on the road and I'm talking to parents. I just moved a parent from one school to another one because this kid was being bullied, was beating up, like a 9-year-old was about to kill himself. 9-year-old. It's not. This is when I tell you I'm hopeless. I've been asking how many parents that we lost. Like when I tell you I'm hangry. My kid is in the hospital. My kid is in a hospital with mental health. When I tell you I'm hangry, I'm angry. And this is not the first time that I'm hearing this. I'm hopeless because I don't see how we're gonna get out of this mess.
Restorative justice. That's how.
I don't see how we're gonna get out of this mess. How many parents we're gonna lose? How many kids we're gonna lose?
We're
How
not
many kids?
What we are is going to hold ourselves accountable. And these we need to experience and recognize that people are beyond angry and beyond frustrated. This is making a social and emotional impact, not just on the students, but their families, right? So we have to get it right. And I want to end with a call to action. Lauren, I know that it's important for us to uplift diversity as we think, Linda, in terms of leadership, right? I'd like to see, more culturally diverse folks with lived experience in these sort of roles moving forward, as you start thinking about the next set of hires that you will do, because I think that centering it in diversity and cultural competency, it's great that people go through training, but there is nothing like that lived experience and navigating systems that have historically oppressed us to be able to dismantle. So you need people who are ready for that and are ready to take the political stances that may not be pretty in order for you to move this work. Because, having gone through Boston Public Schools, there's still a lot of racism that shows up in the way that we get treated and spoken to. So we have a lot of work to do. And I look forward to doing that work alongside each and every one of you who are committed to holding ourselves accountable to the families that we serve. And so with that, I'm going to apologize on behalf of the council for all of the social and emotional trauma that we are causing our families every day as they navigate through these systems. So I am sorry. And with that, I am also accountable. So no more sorry. Sorry, but not sorry. We're here to do the work, and I'm here for it. And so with that, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you.